In Wallace Maximum Security Prison, a black inmate named Malik Carter was about to make a choice that would shift the prison's power structure forever. Whether to submit or push back against the humiliation imposed by white prison guards. What started as a routine intake process spiraled when Officer Dean Holloway, the undisputed enforcer of Wallace's racial hierarchy, singled Malik out for a particularly degrading initiation. Malik Carter wasn't your typical inmate. For years, he had been a force in community activism, known for organizing protests, outmaneuvering systemic oppression, and turning oppression into opportunity. He had survived beatings, betrayals, and the crushing weight of a corrupt system. And Holloway had just given him a new battlefield. When Holloway forced Malik to his knees, toothbrush in hand, ordering him to scrub filth off the prison floor as a public spectacle, the guard had no idea he was picking a fight with a strategist who knew how to weaponize patience. Malik played along, not broken, not defiant, but watchful, turning the moment into something more than humiliation. He was studying the cracks in Wallace, noting every weakness, every pawn, and every blind spot. What began as a cruel display of power would become the first move in a game Holloway didn't even realize he was playing. The prison's hierarchy was about to shift. The guards would lose their grip, and Holloway, Wallace's unchallenged king, was about to learn that some men don't just endure oppression, they dismantle it. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The iron gates of Wallace Maximum Security Prison creaked open with the reluctance of a miser parting with his gold. Malik Carter stood in the transfer van, wrists and ankles shackled, watching as the fortress of concrete and steel prepared to swallow him whole. Unlike the other 3 inmates transferred with him that morning, Malik's eyes weren't downcast. They moved deliberately, cataloging everything: the guard towers, the racial segregation in the yard visible even from the entrance, the way the white guards carried themselves among the predominantly black and Latino inmate population. "Welcome to hell," mumbled the heavy-set white inmate beside him. "Wallace is old school. You best learn quick who runs things." Malik didn't respond. He'd already identified the power structure within seconds of passing through the gates. 3. White guards stood watching the yard from an elevated position, but one in particular caught Malik's attention. Tall, with military straight posture, the man's eyes scanned the yard like a predator. When inmates passed him, especially black inmates, they hunched their shoulders, eyes down. Invisible chains, stronger than the metal ones Malik wore. The processing room buzzed with fluorescent lighting and thinly veiled hostility. Malik stripped, submitted to the humiliating cavity search, and donned the prison blues without comment. He memorized each face, each interaction. The veteran guards treated the black inmates with barely concealed contempt, while the newer guards simply looked uncomfortable with the whole process. One such rookie stood in the corner, young, clean-cut, with eyes that hadn't yet hardened into indifference. He flinched when a senior officer barked at an inmate to spread wider during a search. Malik filed that reaction away. Weakness, perhaps, or conscience. Either could be useful. "Inmate 4587, Carter, Malik," called a voice that carried the weight of authority. "Step forward." The tall guard Malik had spotted earlier stood in the doorway. His name badge read, Holloway. His eyes carried something worse than hate, a cold certainty of superiority. "So, you're the famous community organizer," Holloway said, lips curling into a smirk. "Thought you'd be taller." Malik remained silent, his face a careful mask. He'd been warned about Wallace's reputation, about Officer Dean Holloway in particular, the unofficial king of Wallace Prison, known for his particular brand of cruelty toward black inmates. The warnings hadn't been exaggerated. "I read your file. Quite the resume for a troublemaker. Arrested at 12 for defacing public property with your little protest signs. College-educated, poli-sci, right? Then all those marches and demonstrations. Think you're some kind of revolutionary?" Holloway's voice dripped with contempt. "Here's what you need to understand. Out there, you might have had a voice. In here, you're nothing. Malik met Holloway's gaze without challenge or submission, simply observation. This seemed to irritate Holloway more than any defiance would have. You'll be assigned to C Block. Before you join your people, though, I think the intake area could use some cleaning. He gestured to a corner where bodily fluids from a sick inmate had dried on the floor. On your knees, use this. He tossed a small toothbrush at Malik's feet. The room fell silent. The rookie guard, his badge read Calloway, shifted uncomfortably. The other inmates in processing looked away, familiar with this ritual of humiliation. Malik understood the game immediately. Refuse and punishment would follow, perhaps solitary confinement before he'd even reached his cell block. Comply with visible anger or resentment, and Holloway would savor the victory. So Malik did neither. He picked up the toothbrush, walked to the corner, and got to work with methodical precision. His movements were neither rushed nor reluctant. His face revealed nothing, not humiliation, not rage, not submission. He cleaned with the detached focus of someone completing a mundane task, occasionally glancing up to continue his assessment of the room and its occupants. Holloway's satisfaction curdled into confusion, then irritation. Put your back into it, inmate, he snapped. I want to see your face pressed against that floor. Malik adjusted his position slightly, but maintained his methodical approach. His eyes caught the rookie guard, Calloway, watching the scene with barely concealed discomfort. After 20 minutes, the floor was spotless, and Malik still hadn't given Holloway the reaction he craved. He stood, handed the toothbrush back, and waited for further instructions. Take him to C Block, Holloway ordered another guard, frustration evident in his voice. As Malik was led away, Holloway called after him. I've broken harder men than you, Carter. You'll learn. Malik finally allowed himself the ghost of a smile, but only once his back was turned. C Block operated under an unspoken apartheid. The ground floor cells predominantly housed black inmates, the second tier housed Latinos, and the third tier, with better ventilation and proximity to the showers, housed white inmates. Guards enforced these divisions through selective enforcement of rules and strategic cell assignments. Malik's cell was on the ground floor at the far end near the utility room, the noisiest, dankest location possible. His cellmate, a muscular man in his 40s with sharp features and calculating eyes, watched him enter without greeting. I'm Malik, he offered, setting his meager belongings on the lower bunk. I know who you are, the man replied, his voice surprisingly refined. Andre Williams. Some call me Ghost. He studied Malik with the intensity of a chess player evaluating an opponent. Word travels fast, you're already on Holloway's radar. Not a good place to be. I noticed, Malik said, organizing his space with the same methodical care he'd shown while cleaning. Ghost leaned down from the top bunk. I saw your protest on the news before they locked me up. All that talk about justice and changing the system. He chuckled, but the sound contained no humor. Noble. Pointless, but noble. You don't believe in change? Malik asked. I believe in power, Ghost replied. Who has it, who doesn't, and how to get it. In here, Holloway has it. The warden lets him do whatever he wants as long as there are no riots and the state inspections go smoothly. He lowered his voice. I can see you sizing everything up looking for weaknesses. Word of advice? Don't start fights you can't win. I never do, Malik said simply. The dinner bell rang. Ghost jumped down from his bunk with surprising grace for his size. Chow time. Stay close, keep your eyes down around the guards, especially Holloway. Don't sit with the Latinos. Don't make eye contact with the Aryans on the third tier. Basic survival. Malik followed Ghost to the mess hall, absorbing the complex social dynamics at play. The racial segregation was absolute. Even the serving line had unspoken boundaries. Holloway and 3 other white guards supervised, while a single black guard stood awkwardly near the exit, clearly an outsider among his colleagues. As Malik moved through the line, he noticed the rookie guard, Calloway, supervising the serving station. Their eyes met briefly, and Calloway looked away first. "New fish," called a massive inmate from the table nearest the guards. He was black, but sat apart from the other black inmates, his proximity to the guards making his position clear. This was Holloway's man inside, the enforcer. "You're Carter, right? Big D wants to say hello." Ghost tensed beside Malik. "Darius Wilson. He," muttered Holloway's pet, "keeps the black inmates in line in exchange for privileges." Malik nodded acknowledgement to Big D, but made no move to approach. The large man's eyes narrowed at this subtle defiance, but with Holloway watching, he didn't press the issue. "Later, then," Big D called, the threat evident. Throughout the meal, Malik observed. He noted which guards deferred to Holloway, which inmates had formed alliances, which corners of the room were monitored less closely. He spoke little, but listened to everything. The complaints about work assignments, the whispered exchanges of contraband, the gossip about which inmates had been denied parole despite exemplary records. After dinner, Holloway approached their table. The conversation died instantly. "Carter," he said, "you've been assigned to sewage detail, 6 a.m. tomorrow. I hope you didn't think that fancy education would keep you out of the shit." He smiled thinly. "Consider it your proper welcome to Wallace." The block fell silent, waiting for Malik's reaction. Sewage detail was the most degrading assignment possible, usually reserved for punishment. "I understand," Malik said evenly. Holloway's eyes narrowed at Malik's composure. "We'll see how understanding you are after a week wading through human waste." He turned to leave, then added, "Oh, and the equipment's been acting up. Might get messy." After Holloway left, Ghost shook his head. "He's targeting you specifically, that's not good." "It's exactly what I expected," Malik replied quietly. Later that night, as lockdown commenced, Malik lay on his bunk, processing everything he'd witnessed. Wallace Prison operated exactly as the system had designed it to, a pressure cooker of racial tension, strategically maintained by men like Holloway to keep inmates divided and controllable. "You're not what I expected." Ghost's voice drifted down from the top bunk. "What did you expect?" Someone louder, more righteous anger. "You're too calm," Ghost observed. "Either you're in shock or you're much more dangerous than Holloway realizes." Ghost shifted in his bunk. "The question is, dangerous to whom?" Malik didn't answer immediately. Finally, he said, "I spent 3 years organizing protests against a system designed to resist change. I learned that shouting at a wall doesn't break it down. You have to find the cracks, the points of weakness, and apply pressure strategically." Ghost laughed softly. "And you think you found Wallace's cracks already?" "I found some," Malik confirmed. "Holloway's arrogance, the rookie guard's conscience, the warden's concern for appearances, Big D's insecurity about his position." He paused. "And you?" "Me?" Ghost sounded genuinely surprised. "A Wall Street broker convicted of corporate fraud, housed in a maximum security prison typically reserved for violent offenders somehow surviving without protection from any gang," Malik noted. "You have connections outside these walls that make you valuable to someone in power. You're a crack in the system, too." The silence that followed was heavy with reappraisal. "Like I said," Ghost finally responded, "much more dangerous." He turned over in his bunk. "Get some sleep, revolutionary. Sewage detail starts early." As the lights dimmed for the night, Malik closed his eyes but didn't sleep. In his mind, he was already mapping out connections, potential allies, points of leverage. Holloway believed he was breaking Malik down, but each interaction simply provided more information, more opportunities to understand the intricate power dynamics of Wallace Prison. The game had begun, and Malik was already several moves ahead. In the guard quarters, Ethan Calloway sat on the edge of his bed, unable to shake the image of Malik Carter cleaning the floor with that toothbrush. 2 months into his job at Wallace, and the knot in his stomach grew tighter each day. This wasn't what he'd signed up for. "Rookie," Officer Holloway's voice boomed from the doorway. "Beer run, now." Yes, sir, Ethan replied automatically, reaching for his wallet. Holloway tossed him the keys to his truck. And I expect change from that 20. As Ethan headed to the parking lot, he thought about the look in Malik Carter's eyes during processing. Not defeated, not even angry, but watchful, calculating. It made him more uneasy than any threat could have. Something was shifting in Wallace Prison. Ethan could feel it like the air pressure change before a storm. And somehow, he knew, he would be caught right in the middle of it. The stench of sewage clung to Malik's prison blues despite 3 showers. After 5 days on detail, even Ghost had started sleeping with his back to the cell, facing the wall. But Malik's eyes remained alert, his mind clear despite the exhaustion that weighed on his body. "You're either the most patient man I've ever met," Ghost said as they prepared for breakfast call, "or the craziest." Malik allowed himself a small smile. "Patience isn't my natural state. It's a learned skill." As they entered the mess hall, Malik noticed the subtle shift in how other inmates regarded him. Respect flickered in their glances, not for power or violence, but for endurance. Holloway had meant to break him with the sewage detail. Instead, he'd given Malik a platform. Breakfast followed the same rigid patterns Malik had observed all week. Guards positioned at strategic points, inmates segregated by race. Holloway surveying his kingdom from the elevated guard station, and Ethan Calloway, the rookie, watching everything with poorly concealed discomfort. "Pass the salt," Malik said to a heavy-set inmate named Jackson, who had previously ignored him. Jackson slid the salt shaker over without hesitation, a small gesture but significant. Malik was no longer invisible. "Getting comfortable?" The voice came from behind as Big D loomed over their table. "Holloway says you're handling sewage detail like it's a vacation. Maybe you need something more challenging." Ghost tensed, but Malik's expression remained neutral. "Just doing my time, same as everyone else." Big D leaned closer, his voice dropping. "Know what I think? I think you're playing some kind of game. Holloway sees it too." "No game," Malik replied evenly. "Just survival." "We'll see about that." Big D straightened, his massive frame casting a shadow over the table. "Keep your head down, college boy, this ain't a classroom." As Big D walked away, Ghost shook his head. "You've got 2 of the most dangerous men in Wallace watching you now." 3, Malik corrected, his eyes flicking toward the 3rd tier, tables where white supremacist inmates sat. Their leader, a heavily tattooed man called Hanson, was observing their exchange with naked interest. After breakfast, as inmates dispersed to work assignments, Malik deliberately slowed his pace, falling behind Ghost. He'd memorized the guard's rotation schedule. 3, 2, 1. "Carter." Rookie guard Calloway's voice was low, uncertain. "You dropped something." Malik turned. Calloway held out a small packet of salt, a transparent excuse to speak to him away from the others. "Thanks, officer," Malik said, taking the packet. Their fingers brushed, and Calloway flinched almost imperceptibly. "The sewage detail." Calloway glanced around nervously. "It wasn't supposed to last this long. Holloway keeps extending it." "I'm not surprised." Calloway's eyes betrayed his internal struggle. "Look, I didn't sign up for some of what happens here." "But you stay," Malik observed, neither accusing nor sympathetic. "I have student loans, the pay is good." The excuse sounded hollow even to Calloway. Malik nodded once. "We all make compromises to survive. The question is, how many before you're no longer the person you thought you were?" Before Calloway could respond, heavy footsteps approached. Officer Holloway rounded the corner, eyes narrowing at the sight of them together. "Socializing with the inmates, Calloway, that's against protocol." Holloway's tone was light, but his eyes were cold. "Carter, sewage pipes are waiting. Move it." As Malik walked away, he caught the flash of shame on Calloway's face. Another crack in the foundation, widening slowly. Days bled into weeks. Malik settled into Wallace's brutal rhythm while keeping meticulous mental notes. Which guards were susceptible to bribes? Which turned a blind eye to violence against certain inmates? which could be provoked into revealing the ugly truth behind their professional facades. Most importantly, he observed Holloway's patterns. The man was a creature of habit, arriving at 6:15 each morning, patrolling the yard at specific times, conducting random cell searches that weren't random at all, but targeted at inmates who had recently received visitors. He took lunch at 1 p.m. sharp in the staff room, alone, and left precisely at 7:30 p.m. unless there was an incident requiring overtime. Holloway had 3 weaknesses that Malik identified. First, his pride. He couldn't stand being questioned, especially in front of other guards. Second, his racism. It blinded him to potential threats from white inmates, focusing his suspicion almost exclusively on Black and Latino prisoners. Third, and most usefully, his belief in his own invincibility. Malik was careful to maintain a low profile in Holloway's presence, playing the role of the subdued inmate while quietly building connections. He helped older inmates with writing, offered strategy in the yard's chess games, and always listened to grievances and gossip alike. Ghost watched this subtle campaign with growing interest. "You're building a constituency," he remarked one night as they lay in their respective bunks, "like a politician." "Information is more valuable than contraband in here," Malik replied. "Everyone knows something." "And what do you plan to do with all this information?" Malik stared at the ceiling. "When the time comes, you'll know." The opportunity to test Holloway's control came sooner than expected. 3 weeks into Malik's sentence, the yard buzzed with unusual tension. Inmates clustered in tight groups, voices hushed. "What's happening?" Malik asked Ghost as they walked. "The perimeter." "Fight night," Ghost replied grimly. "Holloway's special entertainment. He picks 2 inmates, usually from different racial groups, and arranges a spontaneous conflict. Guards conveniently look away until significant damage is done. And the inmates agree to this? Those who refuse face consequences. Solitary, lost privileges, denied parole recommendations. Ghost's expression darkened. Holloway makes sure. The deck is stacked. He always knows who will win before it starts. As they rounded the corner, they spotted Holloway deep in conversation with Big D. Both men glanced in their direction. "I don't like that look," Ghost muttered. That afternoon, as Malik finished his now routine sewage detail, he found Big D waiting for him outside the utility room. "Holloway wants to see you," Big D said, the hint of a smile playing at his lips. "Office, now." Holloway's office was Spartan, a metal desk, filing cabinets, and a window overlooking the yard. No personal touches except a military service plaque on the wall. "Close the door," Holloway instructed Big D, who complied before taking a position beside it like a sentinel. "Carter." Holloway leaned back in his chair, studying Malik with cold calculation. "You've been a model prisoner these past weeks. Quiet, compliant, almost too compliant." Malik remained silent, standing at attention. "I've been watching you. You don't fight back, don't complain, just absorb whatever is thrown at you. It's not natural." Holloway stood, circling his desk to stand directly in front of Malik. "I want to see what you're really made of." "Sir?" "There's an incident brewing in the yard. Racial tension. For the safety of all inmates, we need to let off some steam in a controlled way." Holloway's smile didn't reach his eyes. "You're going to fight Myers from D Block tomorrow." Myers was a white inmate known for his brutal fighting style, rumored to have killed another prisoner at his previous facility. "With respect, sir, I'd rather not fight," Malik said. Holloway's smile widened. "It's not a request. Either you fight Myers, or you spend the next month in solitary. Your choice." The choice was obvious. Solitary would isolate Malik, cutting off the connections he'd carefully cultivated. But fighting Myers would be playing directly into Holloway's game. "I understand," Malik replied, his voice neutral. "Good. Tomorrow yard time. Big D will make sure you're in position." Holloway turned back to his desk, dismissing him. This should be educational for everyone. As Malik left the office, Big D fell into step beside him. "Myers is going to destroy you, college boy. Nothing personal. Just how things work around here. Thanks for the warning, Malik said evenly. That night, the cell block hummed with anticipation. Word of the fight had spread, odds were being calculated, and contraband cigarettes were being wagered. You need to prepare, Ghost said urgently. Myers fights dirty, goes for the eyes, the throat. I'm not going to fight him, Malik stated simply. Ghost stared in disbelief. Then you're dead, or worse. There are other ways to win besides fighting. Not in Wallace, not against Holloway's system. Malik sat on his bunk, hands clasped. Every system has its weaknesses. Tomorrow we'll find out what this one's are. Morning came with the heavy expectation of violence. During breakfast, inmates from every block watched Malik with a mixture of curiosity and pity. Myers, seated with the white inmates, made slashing gestures across his throat. As yard time approached, Ethan Calloway was assigned to escort Malik's work detail. When the other inmates were out of earshot, he moved closer. I heard about the fight, he said quietly. It's not right. Holloway's setting you up. I know, Malik replied. Myers has put 3 men in the infirmary this year. 1 never came back. Calloway's voice held genuine concern. I could report this to the warden. Would he care? Calloway's silence was answer enough. Just be careful, the rookie guard finally said. The yard was unusually crowded. Guards positioned themselves strategically, close enough to break up the fight eventually, but far enough to allow significant damage first. Holloway stood on the overlooking walkway, arms crossed, watching. Big D shepherded Malik to the basketball court where Myers waited, bouncing a ball with exaggerated casualness. Showtime, Professor, Big D announced loudly, pushing Malik forward. Let's see those fancy protest moves now. Myers tossed the ball aside, cracking his knuckles. You ready to bleed, boy? Inmates formed a loose circle around them. Ghost stood at the edge, tension evident in his posture. Myers lunged first as expected, a haymaker aimed at Malik's jaw. Malik sidestepped easily. Fight back, someone shouted from the crowd. Myers attacked again, more cautiously this time. Malik evaded once more, keeping his hands open, non-threatening. What the hell are you doing? Myers growled, frustration building. Fight me. No, Malik said clearly, loud enough for the surrounding inmates to hear. I won't fight for anyone's entertainment. The yard quieted. From the walkway, Holloway's expression darkened. Myers glanced up at Holloway, then back at Malik, uncertainty flickering across his face. You hear me? Malik raised his voice, addressing the entire yard now. This isn't about black versus white. It's about them. He pointed toward the guards, keeping us divided, making us hurt each other while they watch. Myers rushed him again, caught him with a glancing blow to the ribs. Malik absorbed the hit without retaliating. He's gonna kill you if you don't fight back, someone shouted. Then he kills me, Malik replied calmly. But I won't play their game. Myers hesitated, glancing again toward Holloway, whose face had turned to stone. Fight him, goddammit, Holloway shouted from the walkway. The moment stretched, taut with tension. Then slowly, Myers lowered his fists. The hell with this, he muttered, stepping back. I ain't dancing for them like a monkey. A ripple of murmurs passed through the crowd. Black inmates exchanged glances with Latino inmates, then with some of the white inmates at the edges of the gathering. For a brief electric moment, the yard's strict racial divisions blurred. Break it up. Holloway's voice cracked like a whip as he descended the stairs to the yard. Everyone back to your assignments. Myers, Carter, both of you to solitary now. As guards moved in to disperse the crowd, Malik caught Ghost's eye. The older inmate gave him a slight nod of respect. Holloway personally escorted Malik to solitary, grip painfully tight on his arm. At the entrance to the isolation wing, he slammed Malik against the wall. You think you're clever? He hissed. Turning this into some kind of political statement? Just making a choice, Malik replied evenly. You've made an enemy today, one you can't afford. Holloway's face was inches from his. This isn't over. I know. Something in Malik's calm acceptance seemed to unnerve Holloway more than defiance would have. He shoved Malik toward the waiting isolation cell. 2 weeks, he snapped. Maybe that'll cool your revolutionary spirit. As the solitary cell door clanged shut behind him, Malik sat on the narrow cot and closed his eyes. The play had gone exactly as he'd anticipated. He'd shown the inmates an alternative to Holloway's control. He'd planted doubt in Myers's mind. Most importantly, he'd revealed Holloway's rage to everyone watching, including Ethan Calloway, whose troubled expression had been evident as Malik was led away. 2 weeks of isolation was a small price to pay. In the darkness of solitary, Malik began to plan his next move. The board was set, the pieces were in motion, and Holloway, for all his power, didn't yet realize he was playing a game he couldn't win. The solitary confinement cell became Malik's monastery. For 14 days, he measured time by the movement of the thin shaft of light that penetrated through the narrow window slit. He used the isolation to refine his strategy, visualizing Wallace Prison as a chessboard, guards, inmates, and administrators all pieces to be moved with precision. When the cell door finally scraped open, Officer Dean Holloway stood in the threshold, his silhouette blocking the harsh corridor light. "Enjoy your vacation, Carter." His voice carried a dangerous edge beneath its casual tone. "Productive," Malik replied, squinting as his eyes adjusted. 2 weeks in dim light had heightened his other senses. The smell of Holloway's aftershave, the faint sound of keys jangling 2 corridors away, the taste of anticipation metallic on his tongue. "I hope you learned something in here." Holloway stepped aside to let Malik exit. "About how things work at Wallace." "I did," Malik said, meeting Holloway's gaze directly. "Thank you for the lesson." The guard's eyes narrowed at Malik's composure. Most men emerged from solitary broken or rage-filled. Malik showed neither. "Your cell assignment has changed," Holloway announced, satisfaction creeping into his voice. "You're in D Block now. Better accommodations." D Block, where Myers and his white supremacist associates were housed. The message couldn't be clearer. Malik was escorted through the prison corridors, feeling the eyes of inmates tracking his progress. His refusal to fight Myers had spread through Wallace like wildfire during his absence. Black inmates nodded subtly as he passed. Even some Latino prisoners made small gestures of acknowledgement. Ghost was waiting in the yard when Malik emerged for afternoon recreation. The older man fell into step beside him without preamble. "You survived," Ghost observed, scanning Malik for signs of physical damage. "It was quiet," Malik replied. "Gave me time to think." "While you were thinking, things changed." Ghost lowered his voice. "Big D's been questioning inmates about you. Your past, your connections, any weaknesses he can find. And Holloway? Watching everything. He's moved you to D Block for a reason, surrounded by Hansen's crew." Ghost's expression was grim. "It's a death sentence." Malik nodded, unsurprised. "And the rookie guard, Calloway? Asked about you twice, seemed concerned." Ghost studied Malik curiously. "You've made an impression on him." They walked the perimeter of the yard, Malik systematically cataloging changes since his isolation. New faces, altered guard rotations, shifting alliances visible in who stood with whom. "Holloway wants me broken," Malik finally said. "Either I submit to his authority or I fight back and give him an excuse to destroy me." "Those are your only options," Ghost agreed. "No," Malik corrected. "There's always another way." He nodded, toward a group of white inmates watching them from across the yard. Hansen, Myers, and 3 others, all heavily tattooed with white power symbols. "Those men are waiting for me in D Block. Holloway's counting on it." "So, what's your play?" "Survival first, then leverage." Malik's eyes moved to the guard tower where Ethan Calloway stood watching the yard. Their eyes met briefly before the young guard looked away. "Everyone has a breaking point, even Holloway." That evening, as Malik was escorted to D Block, The atmosphere changed palpably. The regular cacophony of prison life, shouts, radios, metal doors clanging, gave way to an expectant hush as he was led to cell 42 directly across from Hansen's. The cell already had an occupant, a thin, nervous man in his 40s who barely glanced up when Malik entered. "Jim Patterson," the man mumbled. "Top bunk's yours." Malik nodded, setting his few possessions on the designated bunk. "Malik Carter." "I know who you are." Patterson's voice dropped to a whisper. "Everyone does. Hansen's crew has been talking about you all day." "I expected that." Patterson looked at him with bewilderment. "You know they're planning to hurt you, right? Maybe worse." "Yes." The man shook his head. "You're either crazy or you've got a death wish." "Neither," Malik replied. "Just patient." Lights out came at 10 p.m. Malik lay awake, listening to the sounds of D-block settling. Patterson's breathing eventually evened into sleep, but the tension in the air remained tangible. Malik knew an attack wouldn't come tonight. Holloway would want to build the anticipation, let fear do its work first. Morning brought the usual routine. Wake-up call, breakfast in the mess hall, then work assignments. Malik moved through the day hyper-aware, noting which guards were stationed where, which inmates were watching him, and, most importantly, which of Hansen's crew seemed most susceptible to manipulation. He found his answer in the form of Devin Willis, the youngest member of Hansen's group. The boy couldn't be more than 22, his prison tattoos still fresh and his posture lacking the hardened stance of a longtime inmate. Throughout the day, Malik noticed Willis watching him with curiosity rather than hostility. The attack came during the evening shower rotation. Malik had timed his shower to coincide with the shift change, a vulnerable moment in the prison's security routine. As he stepped under the lukewarm spray, the bathroom emptied suspiciously fast. Only Willis remained, positioned near the door. Then Hansen entered with Myers and two others, spreading out to block potential escape routes. Well, Hansen drawled, flipping a sharpened toothbrush handle in his palm. "Looks like the revolutionary's all alone." Malik didn't bother reaching for his towel. Naked, unarmed, outnumbered 4-1. The situation was precisely what Holloway had engineered. "You know why we're here," Hansen continued, circling closer. "Officer Holloway thinks you need a lesson in respect." "Interesting," Malik replied calmly. "I thought white supremacists like you would resent taking orders from anyone, even a white guard." Hansen's eyes narrowed. "We don't take orders. We have an understanding." "An understanding," Malik echoed. "So he didn't promise you extra commissary? Better work assignments, overlooked contraband?" He looked directly at Willis. "Did he promise you protection from that assault charge when you get out, or was that just for Hansen?" Willis's expression flickered with uncertainty. "What's he talking about?" "Nothing," Hansen snapped. "He's stalling." "Holloway uses everyone," Malik continued steadily. "White, black, Latino. We're all just tools to him. But some tools get better treatment than others, right, Hansen? As long as you keep the other white inmates in line, you get special privileges. Tell me, do your followers know about your private meetings with the warden? The ones Holloway arranges? Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." Hansen lunged forward, pressing the sharpened plastic against Malik's throat. "Shut your mouth." "Hey, what's he talking about?" Myers asked, his certainty faltering. "What meetings?" "He's lying," Hansen hissed, but his hesitation was telling. "Ask him," Malik suggested to Myers. "Ask him why his parole hearing was moved. Up while yours was delayed 3 times now, isn't it?" The pressure against Malik's throat increased. "I said shut it." "Willis," Malik addressed the youngest attacker directly, ignoring the makeshift blade. "Did you know Hansen gave up 2 of your friends last month? The ones caught with heroin?" Holloway knew exactly where to look because Hansen told him. Willis's eyes widened. "That true, Hansen?" "Of course not." But Hansen's denial came too quickly, too forcefully. Why else would they only get 2 weeks in solitary for something that should have meant transfer to maximum security? Malik pressed. Check their records if you don't believe me. The unity among the attackers was fracturing. Myers took a half step back, suspicion darkening his features. We're wasting time, Hansen growled. Let's finish this. You know Holloway's watching right now, Malik said conversationally. There's a guard camera in the vent above the middle shower. He installed it specially to record what happens in here. You'll do his dirty work. Then he'll have evidence to use against you if you ever step out of line. All four men instinctively looked up toward the vent. There was no camera, but the doubt had been planted. He's messing with your heads, Hansen insisted, but the authority in his voice had diminished. Maybe, Malik conceded. Or maybe Holloway's been playing all of us against each other. White inmates against black inmates, guards against prisoners, everyone fighting while he stays in control. Myers took another step back. I'm not taking another charge for this, not with my hearing coming up. Myers, you coward! Hansen started. No, man. Carter's got a point. Why are we doing Holloway's dirty work? Myers looked at the others. You said this was about respect, about keeping our block pure, but if Holloway's just using us... The hesitation was all Malik needed. You have a choice, he told them quietly. Be Holloway's puppets or be men who think for themselves. The standoff stretched for several tense seconds. Then Willis lowered his fists. I'm out, he muttered. This ain't right. Myers followed, suit backing toward the door. Hansen, this is your beef, not ours. Hansen's face contorted with rage. Cowards. All of you. The makeshift blade pressed harder against Malik's throat, drawing a thin line of blood. But before Hansen could do more damage, the bathroom door swung open. Ethan Calloway stood in the doorway, his hand hovering uncertainly near his baton. Break it up, he ordered, voice cracking slightly. Everyone back to their cells. Now. Hansen held the blade in place a moment longer, his eyes locked with Malik's. Then he stepped back, tucking the weapon into his waistband. This isn't over, he whispered, before brushing past Officer Calloway. Myers and the others followed, leaving only Willis lingering by the door. The guys with the heroin, he said, hesitantly. They really were my friends. Malik nodded once, understanding the implications. Willis disappeared after the others. Calloway approached cautiously once they were alone. You're bleeding. It's nothing, Malik replied, reaching for his towel. I should report this, Calloway said, but made no move toward his radio. But you won't. The young guard's expression was troubled. Holloway told me to check the showers at exactly 8:15. Not earlier, not later. He knew what would happen. And now you have a choice, Malik observed, dressing methodically. Report what you saw and face Holloway's retribution, or stay silent and become part of his system. There's no winning either way. There's always another option, Malik countered. You could tell the truth. Calloway laughed bitterly. The truth? In Wallace? Nobody wants the truth. Some do. Malik finished dressing and faced the guard directly. When you're ready to talk about those options, I'll listen. Back in his cell, Patterson looked up in surprise as Malik entered unharmed. You're alive, he said, genuine shock in his voice. How? Words can be more powerful than weapons, Malik replied, carefully dabbing at the cut on his neck, if you know which ones to use. That night, as lights out approached, Malik received an unexpected visitor. Ghost appeared at his cell, ostensibly delivering clean towels, a prison job that gave him access to multiple blocks. Heard about the shower, Ghost murmured, passing the towels through the bars. Hansen's crew is fracturing. Willis is asking questions about those heroin arrests. Myers is distancing himself. Good. Ghost studied him with new respect. You turned their attack into an opportunity. Impressive. Every threat is an opportunity, Malik replied. Every enemy a potential ally. Maybe. Ghost glanced around before continuing. But Holloway won't stop. He can't afford to now. If he loses control of Hansen's crew, He loses D block, Malik finished. I know. Ghost's expression turned calculating. There are those who would benefit from Holloway's fall, people with influence both inside and outside these walls. People like you? Malik asked directly. A faint smile touched Ghost's lips. Let's just say I have interests that align with a change in management. He straightened as a guard approached on rounds. Think about it, revolutionary. You're not the only one playing a long game here. As Ghost moved on, Malik considered the implications of this new alliance. Ghost wasn't motivated by justice or equality. He wanted power. But temporary allies need not share the same ultimate goals. Across the prison in the guards' quarters, Ethan Calloway sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the incident report form on his tablet. The cursor blinked accusingly in the empty description field. Holloway had been explicit. Write that. He'd found Malik Carter instigating a fight with Hansen. Claim Carter had attacked first, make no mention of the weapon. Ethan's fingers hovered over the keyboard. His entire career, his future, depended on this moment. Follow orders, become complicit in Holloway's corrupt system, but secure his position. Or tell the truth and face consequences he couldn't even imagine. He began to type, then stopped, deleted everything and started again. As the clock ticked past midnight, Ethan made his choice. In the warden's office the next morning, Gerald Tate skimmed Calloway's incident report with a frown. This contradicts Holloway's account, he noted, looking up at the nervous young guard standing before him. Yes, sir. Ethan swallowed hard. But it's what I saw. The warden set the tablet down with a sigh. Officer Calloway, Wallace Prison functions because of order. Order requires consistency, among the guards especially. I understand, sir, but let me finish. Tate's voice hardened. Officer Holloway has served at Wallace for 15 years. His methods may seem harsh to a newcomer like yourself, but they're effective. The incident reports we file become permanent record. They affect funding, staffing decisions, even my own performance reviews. So you want me to lie? Ethan asked, immediately regretting his bluntness. The warden's expression didn't change. I want you to reconsider your statement. Think carefully about your future here. He slid the tablet back across the desk. You have until the end of your shift to submit your final report. As Ethan left the office, he nearly collided with Holloway in the corridor. The warden talk. Some sense into you, rookie? Holloway asked, his smile not reaching his eyes. I'm considering my options, Ethan replied carefully. Holloway moved closer, voice dropping. Let me make it simple for you. You're either with us or you're against us. There's no middle ground at Wallace. As the senior officer walked away, Ethan stood frozen, the weight of his decision pressing down like a physical force. In his pocket, his phone contained a recorded conversation from the previous night, Holloway explicitly instructing him to falsify the report. It was insurance, protection, or a death sentence to his career depending on how he chose to use it. In the prison yard that afternoon, Malik observed the subtle shift in dynamics. Hansen's crew maintained their distance from each other. Debagger. D watched everything with growing concern, and for the first time black and white inmates engaged in cautious, brief interactions that would have been unthinkable weeks earlier. Seeds of doubt had been planted, watered with truth, and were beginning to sprout. The kingdom of Wallace Prison was changing, one mind at a time. Holloway, surveying his domain from the guard tower, sensed the shift as well. His eyes found Malik in the crowd, and the hatred in his gaze was palpable even at a distance. The game was intensifying, and both players knew it. But only one understood the true rules of engagement. 3 days after the shower incident, Malik found a folded note tucked inside his breakfast tray. In neat, careful handwriting were 4 words: laundry. 2 p.m. Come alone. He pocketed the note without changing his expression, continuing his meal. While scanning the mess hall, Ethan Calloway was on duty at the far end, deliberately avoiding eye contact. The young guard had been notably absent from D Block since submitting his incident report, a report that, according to prison gossip, had contradicted Holloway's version of events. You've got an admirer, Ghost observed, sliding onto the bench, across from Malik. Just making friends, Malik replied, careful to keep his voice neutral. Ghost's eyes flickered briefly to Calloway. Dangerous friends. All friends are dangerous in Wallace. At exactly 2 p.m., Malik arrived at the laundry facility with a bundle of sheets, his assigned work detail providing perfect cover. The industrial room hummed with the rhythmic thud of washing machines and the hiss of steam presses. 3 inmates operated the equipment under the board supervision of a single guard, Officer Simmons, an older man counting down the months to retirement. Carter, Simmons called, beckoning him over. Special assignment supply closet needs inventory. Malik nodded, recognizing the setup. The supply closet was one of the few blind spots in Wallace's security system. No cameras, poor sightlines from the main floor. As he entered the narrow space lined with detergent bottles and cleaning supplies, he found Ethan Calloway already waiting, tension radiating from his hunched shoulders. Close the door, Ethan whispered. Malik complied, leaving it slightly ajar, to avoid suspicion. Your note was risky. Everything's risky now. Ethan's voice trembled slightly. Holloway knows I didn't back his story. The warden gave me a formal reprimand for inconsistent reporting. They've taken me off regular rotation in D block. But you're still here, Malik observed. Why? The union rules. They can't fire me without cause, and technically I didn't break any regulations. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. But Holloway's making my life hell. Worst shifts, extra duties, constant performance reviews. You made your choice. Yeah. Ethan met his eyes directly for the first time. And I'm still making it. I've been documenting things, Holloway's abuse of power, the fights he arranges, how he manipulates inmates against each other. Malik's pulse quickened, though his expression remained neutral. Documentation? Ethan glanced nervously at the door before pulling a small digital recorder from his pocket. Audio mostly. Some notes, dates, times, names. Why tell me this? Because I don't know what to do with it. Ethan's voice dropped lower. If I take it to the warden, it disappears. If I keep collecting evidence while doing nothing, I'm complicit. There are other options, Malik suggested. Like what? The media? Prison advocacy groups? I'd lose my job, maybe face charges for recording without consent. Would that be worse than becoming part of the system you claim to despise? The question hung between them. Outside, a dryer buzzer sounded, making Ethan flinch. I need to know something first, Ethan said finally. What's your end game here? You're working some kind of angle. Everyone can see that. But what do you really want? Malik considered his answer carefully. Truth would be more effective than lies with this man. Justice, he said simply. Not revenge, not power. The system Holloway represents, one that profits from keeping racial tensions high and inmates divided, needs to be exposed and dismantled. And you think you can do that from inside a cell? No, but I can create the conditions that make it possible. Malik nodded toward the recorder. With the right evidence in the right hands. Ethan studied him for a long moment. You were never just an activist, were you? The charges against you, inciting violence at those protests, they weren't true, but they weren't completely false either. You were playing the system even then. I was exposing it, Malik corrected. Sometimes that requires strategic actions that appear questionable to outside observers. Another dryer buzzed. Their time was running short. I need to think, Ethan said, tucking the recorder away. But if I decided to help, how would we even get the evidence out? All outgoing mail is screened, visitor conversations are monitored. There are always blind spots in any system, Malik replied. Find them. As they prepared to leave, Ethan paused. One more thing. Hanson's been transferred to another facility. Suddenly, with no warning. Holloway made it happen yesterday. He's eliminating loose ends, Malik noted, becoming paranoid. And dangerous, Ethan added. Watch yourself. The next morning brought a surprise for D Block. Big D sauntered in during breakfast, accompanied by two other black inmates who typically served as his muscle. "What's he doing here?" Patterson whispered to Malik. "C Block enforcers don't come to D." Malik watched Big D claim a table near the center of the room, a deliberate power move. Expanding his territory. Patterson's eyes widened. Holloway's moving him? Or he's moving himself? Malik replied thoughtfully. Interesting. Throughout the day, rumors spread. Hansen's sudden transfer had created a power vacuum in D Block. Without his iron grip, the white supremacist faction was splintering. Holloway, rather than allowing natural leadership to emerge, had apparently decided to install Big D as the new enforcer for both blocks. "It's a mistake," Ghost commented during yard time. "The white inmates will never accept Big D's authority, and C Block will resent losing him." "Holloway's desperate," Malik observed. "He's trying to maintain control by any means necessary." "You planned this," Ghost realized, studying Malik. With newfound appreciation. "Hansen's transfer. You wanted this to happen." "I anticipated it," Malik corrected. "Holloway is predictable in his need for absolute control. Remove one puppet, replace it with another." "And Big D? Is he part of your plan too?" Malik's gaze drifted to where Big D was holding court near the weight bench, his booming laugh carrying across the yard. "Everyone is part of the plan, whether they realize it or not." That afternoon, Malik arranged a seemingly casual encounter with Big D in the corridor outside the library. The larger man was alone, unusual for someone of his status. "Carter," Big D acknowledged, his tone less hostile than in previous interactions. "Heard you survived Hansen's welcome party." News travels fast. Guards talk, inmates listen. Big D glanced around before continuing. Holloway was pissed when his little setup didn't work out. I imagine he was disappointed in Hansen. And that rookie guard who wouldn't play ball. Big D's expression shifted subtly. Holloway's got a real problem with people who don't know their place. There it was, the opening Malik had been waiting for. Must be difficult being his right hand. All the responsibility of enforcement, none of the respect. Big D's eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" "Just an observation. Holloway treats the white guards as equals. The white inmate enforcers get privileges, protection, but you?" Malik shrugged. "You do his dirty work in C Block and now D Block, but everyone knows he looks down on you, even as he uses you." "You don't know what you're talking about," Big D growled, but uncertainty flickered in his eyes. "How many times has he promised to support your parole hearing? Yet you're still here. Going on what? 7 years now. Meanwhile, Hansen gets transferred to medium security after just 4. Malik delivered each word precisely, planting seeds of doubt. Ever wonder why? Big D stepped closer, using his bulk to intimidate. "You trying to get yourself hurt, Carter? Just having a conversation between two men who understand how Wallace really works." Malik didn't back away. "How Holloway really works. We're nothing alike. Aren't we? Both black men in a system designed to keep us down. The difference is I don't pretend the white man throwing me scraps is my friend." For a moment, Malik thought he'd pushed too far. Big D's massive hands clenched into fists, his breathing quickening with anger. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed, a short, bitter sound. "You've got balls, Carter. Stupid, but balls." He took a step back. "Holloway isn't my friend. He's my meal, ticket, business. And if there was better business elsewhere?" The question hung in the air between them. Big D regarded Malik with new wariness. "You're playing a dangerous game," he said finally. "So are you. Difference is, I know all the rules." Malik nodded toward the approaching guard. "Think about it, Darius. You're smarter than Holloway gives you credit for." The use of his real name rather than his prison moniker hit its mark. Something shifted in Big D's expression before he turned away, continuing down the corridor without another word. Seeds planted. Now to nurture their growth. The catalyst came 3 days later in the form of a new directive from Warden Tate. Due to security concerns, D block and C block would now share yard time, while other blocks would have their recreation, hours adjusted. The official reason was maintenance work in the East Yard, but everyone recognized the real purpose. Holloway wanted Big D to have maximum oversight of both blocks simultaneously. The first combined yard session bristled with tension. White inmates from D block clustered defensively, outnumbered by the predominantly black population of C block. Big D positioned himself centrally, his authority clearly on display. Malik sought out Willis, who had become something of an outlier since Hanson's departure. The young white inmate stood alone near the fence, avoiding both his former allies and potential enemies. Quite the new arrangement, Malik observed, approaching casually. Willis glanced nervously at the guard tower where Holloway surveyed the yard. They're setting us up for a war. Maybe, or maybe just a specific battle. Willis eyed him suspiciously. What do you mean? Big D controlling both blocks benefits only one person, Holloway. Malik kept his voice low. The question is, who benefits if Big D fails? You? Everyone who's tired of being pieces on Holloway's board. The conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the basketball court. One of Big D's lieutenants had cornered a white inmate from D block, accusing him of disrespect. Within seconds, racial lines were being drawn as inmates from both sides moved toward the confrontation. Right on schedule, Malik murmured. You knew this would happen? Willis asked. Holloway's counting on it. A controlled conflict to justify, tighter restrictions, prove his system works. Malik turned to Willis. Unless someone disrupts his script. Their eyes met in silent communication. Then Willis nodded once before jogging toward the developing confrontation. What happened next unfolded with stunning rapidity. Instead of joining his white counterparts, Willis stepped between the antagonists, facing Big D's lieutenant. This isn't about race, he called out, loud enough for all to hear. It's about them. He pointed toward the guard tower. Keeping us fighting each other instead of seeing the real enemy. The words, Malik's words from the failed fight with Myers, rippled through the crowd. Big D strode forward, clearly intending to reassert control, but hesitated when he saw Malik watching from the sidelines. Their earlier conversation echoed between them. For a crucial moment, the fate of the yard balanced on a knife's edge. Then Big D made a decision that sent shockwaves through Wallace Prison. Instead of enforcing Holloway's racial divisions, he placed a heavy hand on Willis's shoulder. Man's got a point, he announced. We've been playing their game long enough. In the guard tower, Holloway's reaction was immediate. He barked orders into his radio, and seconds later, sirens blared across the yard. Guards rushed in with batons, raised but faced an unexpected situation. There was no riot to quell, just inmates from both racial groups standing together in defiance of the system that had kept them divided. Yard time terminated, Holloway's voice boomed over the loudspeaker. All inmates return to your cells immediately. As guards herded them inside, Malik caught Ethan's eye across the yard. The young guard's expression was a mixture of awe and trepidation. Malik gave him a nearly imperceptible nod. Now, the gesture said. It begins now. Later that night, as Wallace Prison hummed with whispers of what had transpired in the yard, Ethan Calloway made his decision. In the small apartment he rented near the prison, he compiled his recordings, notes, and documentation of Holloway's abuses. He encrypted the files, copied them onto 3 separate drives, and addressed packages to carefully selected recipients. A prison reform advocacy group, a journalist known for investigations into correctional facility conditions, and his own lawyer. His hands trembled as he sealed the envelopes. There would be no turning back from this moment. His career in corrections would effectively end once the evidence became public. But watching the unified stand in the yard today had shown him something he hadn't believed possible. Change could happen, even in a place as entrenched in corruption as Wallace. Meanwhile, in the administrative wing, Holloway paced the warden's office like a caged animal. This was a coordinated demonstration, he insisted. Carter's behind it, him and Big D. They're undermining everything we've built here. Warden Tate regarded him coolly. What you've built, Dean, let's be clear about that. What we've built, Holloway corrected, desperation edging his voice. 15 years of order, control. You've benefited as much as anyone from my methods, and now those methods appear to be failing. The warden's tone was measured, calculating. The Board of Corrections is already asking questions about increased incident reports. If there's even a hint of organized resistance among inmates. Give me 2 weeks, Holloway pleaded. I'll get things back under control. Carter in solitary, Big D transferred or isolated. Whatever it takes. Tate studied him for a long moment. Whatever it takes, he repeated slowly. Just remember, Dean, if this situation deteriorates further, Wallace will need a scapegoat. Someone to take responsibility. The implication hung heavy in the air between them. As Holloway left the warden's office, his carefully constructed world was crumbling around him. His allies were wavering. His enemies were multiplying. Even the system he'd served so faithfully was preparing to sacrifice him if necessary. In his cell, Malik lay awake, feeling the currents of change moving through Wallace's concrete walls. The first strike had landed, not a blow of violence, but a strategic repositioning of pieces on the board. Big D questioning his allegiance. Ethan crossing the line into active resistance, Holloway beginning to unravel under pressure. And this was only the beginning. It's working, isn't it? Patterson whispered from the bottom bunk, his voice tinged with disbelief. It's starting to, Malik confirmed quietly. I've been here 7 years, Patterson said. Never thought I'd see inmates standing together like that, white and black. People will surprise you when given the opportunity to be more than what the system expects. Patterson was silent for a moment. Holloway won't let this go. He'll come after you with everything he has. I'm counting on it, Malik replied. His fear will make him careless. And careless men make mistakes. Across the prison in C Block, Big D sat alone in his cell, contemplating the choice he'd made in the yard. For the first time in years, he'd acted against Holloway's interests, against the role he'd been assigned in Wallace's hierarchy. The consequences would be severe. His privileges would be revoked, his protection compromised. But Malik's words had awakened something long dormant within him: self-respect. Outside the prison walls, Ethan Calloway dropped 3 packages into a mailbox, then sat in his car, staring at the illuminated facade of Wallace Prison in the distance. By morning, the evidence would be in transit. By the end of the week, Holloway's kingdom would face its first real threat from the outside world. The first strike had been delivered. The next would be decisive. The morning after the yard incident, Malik was pulled from breakfast without explanation. 2 guards, neither of whom he recognized, escorted him not to the warden's office as expected, but to the seldom-used administrative interview room. Wait here, one ordered, securing his handcuffs to the metal table before both exited. Malik surveyed the Spartan room, a table, 2 chairs, and a 2-way mirror that almost certainly had observers behind it. Wallace rarely used this space except for official investigations or parole hearings, suggesting that something significant had shifted overnight. After 15 minutes, the door opened. Warden Gerald Tate entered alone, carrying a thin manila folder. His expression revealed nothing as he took the seat opposite Malik. Mr. Carter, he began formally, I think it's time we had a conversation. I agree, Warden. Malik kept his tone respectful but not submissive. Tate opened the folder, revealing incident reports and what appeared to be transcripts. You've caused quite a stir in my prison. Officer Holloway believes you're orchestrating some kind of movement among the inmates. Does he? He wants you in solitary, indefinitely. Tate studied Malik's reaction. Says you're a security risk. And what do you think, Warden? A ghost of a smile touched Tate's lips. I think Holloway has grown accustomed to running Wallace his way, perhaps too accustomed. The statement was revealing, a fracture in the administration that Malik had been counting on. The warden was distancing himself from Holloway. I'm just serving my time, Malik offered. We both know that's not true. Tate closed the folder. What happened in the yard yesterday wasn't spontaneous. It was calculated. The question is, what are you hoping to achieve? Malik considered his response carefully. A more equitable environment benefits everyone, including administration. Less violence means fewer incident reports. Fewer reports means better statistics for the Board of Corrections. Pragmatic, Tate observed. But Holloway claims your methods are creating instability. Change always appears as instability to those invested in the status quo. The warden leaned back, his calculating gaze assessing Malik with new interest. I've been running Wallace for 12 years, Mr. Carter. I've seen reformers come and go. Most end up broken by the system they hope to change. I'm not a reformer, Warden. I'm a strategist. Indeed. Tate stood abruptly. You'll remain in D block for now. No solitary, against Officer Holloway's recommendation. Consider it a professional courtesy. As the warden reached the door, Malik called after him. When the time comes, Warden, remember who gave Holloway his power in the first place. Tate paused, his back stiffening slightly, before exiting without reply. The guards returned, uncuffed Malik from the table and escorted him not to D block but to the yard, where a small group of inmates was already gathered for maintenance work. Among them was Big D, methodically raking leaves near the fence line. The guards positioned Malik at the opposite end of the yard to pull weeds, close enough to see Big D, but far enough that conversation seemed impossible. After they retreated to their monitoring position, Big D gradually worked his way closer through a series of natural-looking movements. Thought you'd be in solitary by now, Big D remarked when he was within earshot, his voice low. Warden overruled. Holloway, Malik replied, continuing his work. Big D gave a low whistle. That's new. Tate usually lets Holloway handle discipline his way. Times are changing. They worked in silence for several minutes before Big D spoke again. What you said before, about Holloway using me, you weren't wrong. Malik waited, sensing more was coming. 7 years I've been his man in C block, kept the peace his way, enforced his rules. Big D's massive hands clutched the rake tightly. 2 parole hearings denied because of continued behavioral concerns that weren't in my file until the day before each hearing. Holloway made sure you'd stay where he needed. You, Malik concluded. Yeah. The single word carried years of suppressed anger, and now he wants me controlling D block too, keeping everyone divided, fighting each other instead of seeing who's really pulling the strings. It's an effective system. Big D paused his raking, staring directly at Malik. But it's breaking down, isn't it? Because of you. Because of us, Malik corrected. Every inmate who chooses to see the truth, every guard who questions orders, the system only works when everyone plays their assigned role. Another stretch of silence as Big D considered this. The guards had begun to look in their direction with suspicion. I know things, Big D finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. About Holloway. Things that would end him if they got out. Malik continued pulling weeds, giving no outward indication of the significance of this moment. What kind of things? 3 inmates died during Holloway's tenure. Officially suicides or inmate violence. Unofficially, Big D left the implication. Hanging. Plus financial stuff. Contraband he lets through for a cut. Evidence that disappears. Testimony he's fabricated for court. That would be valuable information, if it could be proven. Big D resumed raking, aware of the guard's growing attention. I kept receipts, insurance, hidden where no one would look. Why tell me this now? Because you were right about another thing too. Big D's voice hardened. When one tyrant falls, someone takes his place. I want to make sure it's the right someone. Before Malik could respond, a guard approached, ordering them to separate. As Big D moved away, his parting words were barely audible. Chapel, tomorrow, noon service. That night, when Malik returned to his cell, he found Ghost waiting for him. An unusual breach of block boundaries that spoke to the former Wall Street broker's influence. Heard you had a private meeting with the warden, Ghost said without preamble. And yard time with Big D, busy day. News travels fast, Malik observed. It's my business to stay informed. Ghost glanced around before continuing in a lower voice. There's more you should know. That rookie guard, Calloway? Word is he's been collecting evidence against Holloway. Audio recordings, incident reports, statements from inmates. Interesting. More than interesting, dangerous. Ghost's expression was serious. For him and anyone connected to him. If Holloway finds out, he already suspects, Malik replied. That's why he's pushing for solitary. Isolation is his default solution for threats. Ghost nodded slowly. The Board of Corrections has scheduled an unannounced inspection next week. Someone filed a complaint detailed enough that they couldn't ignore it. Ethan, Malik realized. The guard had made his move. Holloway's panicking, Ghost continued. Ordering cells cleaned, medical records updated, problem inmates transferred temporarily to other facilities. A complete whitewash. Which gives us an opportunity, Malik concluded. If we can ensure the inspectors see the reality instead of the facade. Ghost studied him with begrudging respect. You really do think 10 steps ahead, don't you? I try to consider all possible moves on the board. Malik sat on his bunk, mind already calculating angles. The question is, who else is playing the same game? The following day at noon, Malik attended the voluntary chapel service, something he had never done before. The prison chaplain, an elderly man named Father Martinez, seemed surprised, but welcomed him with a nod. The chapel was sparsely attended. 3 older white inmates, 2 Latinos from B Block and Big D, seated alone in the back row. Malik took a position 2 rows ahead, waiting through the short service with outward patience. When it concluded, most inmates filed out immediately. Big D remained seated, head bowed as if in continued prayer. Father Martinez approached Malik with a gentle smile. Your first time joining us, Mr. Carter. I hope you found some peace. I'm searching for truth, Father, Malik replied, loud enough for Big D to hear. Some believe it can be found in unexpected places. The chaplain nodded thoughtfully. The chapel is always open to those seeking answers. Take your time. He retreated to his office, leaving Malik and Big D alone in the sacred space. After ensuring no guards were watching through the chapel windows, Big D moved to sit beside Malik. Holloway never monitors the chapel, he explained in a hushed tone. Too much respect for the church, or fear, maybe. Only place in Wallace, without cameras or regular guard patrols. Smart place to talk, Malik acknowledged. Big D reached beneath the pew, retrieving a small package wrapped in chapel program papers. 7 years of insurance. Dates, names, incidents. Everything I could document without being obvious. Malik accepted the package, feeling the weight of what appeared to be a USB drive within the paper. Most damning is the Jenkins case, Big D continued. Black inmate, found hanging in his cell 5 years ago. Official ruling, suicide. Truth, Holloway had him beaten for refusing to inform on drug traffic in C Block. Went too far, had to cover it up. You witnessed this? Helped cover it up, Big D admitted, shame evident in his voice. Holloway said if I didn't, I'd be found. The same way. I was younger then, scared. And now? Now I'm tired. Tired of being his tool. Tired of seeing my own people suffer while I help the man holding the whip. Big D's massive frame seemed to shrink under the weight of his confession. This isn't about revenge, it's about setting things right before I face whatever comes next. Malik carefully tucked the package into his waistband. This helps, but we need something more immediate. Something public that exposes Holloway's true nature to everyone. Inmates, guards, administration. Like what? A situation where he loses control. Where his mask slips in front of witnesses he can't silence or intimidate. Big D considered this. The inspection tour, board representatives, maybe even state officials. Holloway will be on edge, desperate to maintain appearances. Exactly. Push the right buttons at the right moment, and he self-destructs. Big D finished. But it would have to be something big. something he couldn't ignore or explain away. "I have an idea," Malik said, "but I'll need help from multiple blocks, people willing to risk retaliation." Name. A unified demonstration during inspection, not a riot. Something peaceful but unmistakable. Every inmate, regardless of race, standing together in silence when the officials tour the yard. Big D whistled softly. Holloway would lose his mind. That kind of united front is his worst nightmare. Exactly. And when he overreacts in front of state officials. Game over. Big D nodded slowly. I can spread the word in C block. Got enough respect left for that. D block will be harder without Hansen's crew on board. I'll handle D block. And I think our friend Ghost can manage B block connections. As they prepared to leave separately, Big D hesitated. Why are you doing this, really? You could keep your head down, serve your time. Most men would. Because systems don't change by themselves, Malik replied. They change when good people refuse to participate in their own oppression. Big D studied him for a long moment. You really believe that? Even in a place like Wallace? Especially in a place like Wallace. The next 3 days passed in a flurry of careful, nearly invisible organizing. Messages passed between blocks through the laundry, the kitchen, work details. Ghost leveraged his financial connections with guards to ensure certain inmates were positioned strategically. Even Patterson, Malik's unassuming cellmate, revealed a network of older inmates who communicated through a library book checkout system. Meanwhile, outside Wallace's walls, things were accelerating faster than anticipated. Ethan Calloway's evidence had reached its destinations, and the response was swift. The Prison Reform Advocacy Group filed an emergency petition with the state. The journalist began making calls to corrections department officials. Ethan's lawyer prepared documentation to protect his client as a whistleblower. Holloway, sensing the walls closing in, grew increasingly erratic. Cell searches doubled. Inmate privileges were revoked without explanation. Guards loyal to him patrolled the blocks with heightened aggression, looking for any excuse to assert control. The morning of the inspection, Wallace Prison hummed with suppressed energy. Board representatives arrived at 9 a.m., accompanied by 2 state officials and a court-appointed observer. Standard procedure for compliance reviews, but the presence of the observer suggested concerns beyond routine inspection. Holloway greeted them in the administrative building, his uniform immaculate, his smile fixed in place. Warden Tate stood beside him, maintaining a professional distance that became more noticeable as the tour progressed. As the inspection group moved through the blocks, inmates maintained an unnerving silence. No catcalls, no complaints, not even the usual background chatter of prison life. Just watching eyes and attention thick enough to cut. They're unusually quiet today, one board representative noted as they toured C Block. Respect for authority, Holloway explained smoothly. We maintain strict discipline at Wallace. The warden's sideways glance suggested he found this explanation as implausible as the inspectors did. By the time they reached the yard for the afternoon recreation period, Holloway was visibly on edge. Every block had been released simultaneously, an unusual protocol that the warden had insisted upon to demonstrate normal operations. Hundreds of inmates filled the yard, segregating themselves by race as always. The inspection team observed from the elevated walkway, taking notes and photographs. Holloway stood rigidly beside them, hyper-aware of the precarious control he maintained. At precisely 2:15 p.m. it happened. Like a choreographed dance, every inmate, black, white, Latino, moved to stand at attention, facing the walkway in complete silence. No shouting, no demands, just a unified demonstration that transcended Wallace's strict racial divisions. The board representatives murmured among themselves, clearly unsettled by the display. The court observer began writing furiously in his notebook. "What is the meaning of this?" one state official demanded. Holloway's face flushed dark red. "Some kind of organized demonstration, completely unauthorized. I'll handle this immediately." He grabbed his radio. "All guards, yard lockdown protocol, now." "Is that necessary?" the warden interjected. "They're just standing there. No violence, no disruption." This is an orchestrated show of defiance, Holloway snapped, his composure cracking. I know exactly who's behind it, too. Guards rushed into the yard, batons drawn. The inspection team watched in growing alarm as the peaceful demonstration was met with aggressive force. Still, not a single inmate fought back or broke formation. Officer Holloway, the court observer called. This response seems disproportionate to the situation. You don't understand these animals, Holloway snarled, the slur slipping out before he could stop himself. Give them an inch. They'll tear this place apart. A stunned silence fell over the inspection team. The racial undertone of Holloway's outburst was unmistakable. I believe we've seen enough, the lead board representative said coldly. Warden Tate, we'll continue this inspection with you alone. In the yard below, guards had begun singling out inmates for removal, primarily black inmates, Malik among them. The racial bias in the enforcement was obvious to everyone watching. Officer Holloway, stand down your men immediately, the warden ordered, his voice carrying across the yard. All inmates return to your blocks in an orderly fashion. Guards, escort only, no physical contact. For a moment, it seemed Holloway might refuse the direct order. His face contorted with barely controlled rage as he stared down at the yard where Malik stood calmly amid the chaos. Then, with visible effort, he complied. Yes, Warden. As the inmates were led inside, the damage was done. Holloway had revealed his true nature in front of state officials, had demonstrated the racial bias that permeated his enforcement. More damning, the unified demonstration had shown that Wallace's inmates were not the violent animals he had described, but organized, disciplined, and capable of peaceful protest. That evening, as the inspection team departed with grim expressions and bulging notebooks, an emergency administrative meeting was called. Holloway, the warden, and key administrative staff were sequestered in the conference room for hours. When they emerged, Holloway was no longer wearing his uniform jacket with its badge of authority. Word spread through Wallace like wildfire. Officer Dean Holloway had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. The State Department of Corrections had received credible evidence of systematic abuses and was launching a formal inquiry. In his cell that night, Malik heard the news from Patterson, who had connections in the administrative building's cleaning crew. They say he went ballistic in the meeting, Patterson whispered excitedly. Accused the warden of undermining him, threatened to reveal where the bodies are buried. Security had to escort him from the building. And the USB drive? Malik asked. Delivered to the court observer by Big D himself, Patterson confirmed. He got himself assigned to water service for the inspection team. No one even noticed. Malik lay back on his bunk, contemplating the day's victories. The unified demonstration had worked precisely as intended, forcing Holloway to show his true face when it mattered most. Big D's evidence would provide the historical context for a pattern of abuse. And Ethan's recordings would corroborate everything from an insider's perspective. The system that had seemed impenetrable just weeks ago now showed fractures running through its foundation. What happens now? Patterson asked, voicing the question circulating through every block. Now, Malik replied, we watch the kingdom fall. But even as he spoke, Malik knew the battle wasn't over. Holloway might be suspended, but he wasn't defeated. Men like him didn't surrender power without a fight. And in the vacuum his absence created, new power struggles would emerge. Ghost had warned him from the beginning. When one tyrant falls, another rises. The question now was who would fill the void, and whether Wallace Prison would simply trade one corrupt system for another. As if summoned by these thoughts, Ghost appeared at their cell door during evening rounds, his face uncharacteristically tense. It worked, he acknowledged. Holloway's gone for now. But he's already making calls from outside, calling in favors. And the warden's positioning himself as the reformer who will clean up Wallace. Expected, Malik replied. There's more, Ghost continued, voice dropping lower. Hanson's been making noise at his new facility about returning to Wallace, and there are rumors about administrative restructuring that would bring in outside enforcers, state-level corrections officers known for restoring order in problematic prisons. The implication was clear. They had won a battle, not the war. The system was already adapting, preparing to reassert control in new ways. Get some rest, Ghost advised before moving on. Things are going to move quickly now. In the guards' quarters, Ethan Calloway packed a small duffel bag with essential belongings. His lawyer had been explicit. Once Holloway realized who had leaked the recordings, retaliation was inevitable. Better to be away from Wallace when that happened. As he prepared to leave, Ethan glanced once more at the prison where he'd worked for less than a year. He had joined corrections believing he could make a difference from within. Now he understood Malik's perspective more clearly. Some systems couldn't be reformed. They needed to be exposed, dismantled, and rebuilt from the ground up. Across town, in a bar frequented by off-duty prison staff, Dean Holloway sat alone, nursing his third whiskey. 15 years of service, of maintaining order in a place designed for chaos, and this was his reward: suspension, investigation, scapegoating. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through contacts until he found the number he needed. A former colleague now working at the state level, someone who understood the realities of controlling a prison population, someone who owed him. "It's Holloway," he said when the call connected. "I need a favor. It's about Wallace Prison and an inmate named Malik Carter." The game wasn't over. It had merely entered a new, more dangerous phase. The morning after Holloway's suspension, Wallace Prison awoke to an unfamiliar sound: television news vans arriving outside the main gate. Overnight, the story had broken. Abuse of power. Whistleblower exposes systematic racism in Southern Seoul. Prison scrolled across cell block televisions during breakfast. Inmates gathered around, witnessing their daily reality transformed into headline news. Allegations include orchestrated violence, falsified reports, and possible involvement in inmate deaths, the reporter stated gravely. An anonymous whistleblower provided extensive audio recordings and documentation that paint a disturbing picture of institutionalized abuse at Wallace Maximum Security Prison. Patterson nudged Malik as they watched. "That's us. That's what we did." "That's what Ethan did," Malik corrected quietly. "He took the biggest risk." The broadcast continued. "Officer Dean Holloway has been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. State corrections officials have scheduled an emergency hearing, and civil rights organizations are calling for a complete review of all Wallace Prison practices." The mood in the mess hall shifted perceptibly. Guards looked anxious, uncertain, without Holloway's commanding presence. Inmates spoke more freely, their voices rising above the usual cautious murmur. The invisible boundaries between racial groups seemed less defined, with small, mixed clusters forming at some tables. "The kingdom's walls are crumbling," Ghost observed, sliding onto the bench beside Malik. "But the question remains, who will rule what's left?" Before Malik could respond, the loudspeakers crackled to life. "Attention all inmates and staff. This is Warden Tate. In light of recent events, I am implementing temporary security protocols. All non-essential movement between blocks is suspended. Work details will continue under enhanced supervision. My administration is cooperating fully with state investigators, and I ask for your patience during this transitional period." "Transitional period," Ghost repeated with a cynical smile. "He's already positioning himself as the reformer." "Expected," Malik replied, watching the warden's loyal guards take up strategic positions around the mess hall. "He needs to distance himself from Holloway without losing control." As inmates were escorted back to their blocks, the atmosphere throughout Wallace vibrated with potential energy, like a coiled spring finally released from pressure. In C Block, 2 inmates refused orders to clean the shower area, citing new evidence of staff misconduct as their reason. In B Block, Latino inmates who had previously kept their heads down now stared directly at guards who passed, no longer averting their eyes and practiced deference. Small acts of resistance rippled through the prison, nothing coordinated, nothing violent, just the collective testing of boundaries that had suddenly become unclear. By afternoon, the first clash erupted. A guard in D Block, one of Holloway's most loyal, shoved an inmate for walking too slowly. Instead of absorbing the abuse in silence, the inmate pushed back. Within seconds, guards converged with batons raised, but they faced something unexpected. A dozen inmates moving to stand beside their blockmate, forming a human barrier. "Back in your cells, now!" the lead guard shouted, his voice carrying a note of panic that would have been unthinkable days earlier. "We know our rights," one inmate called back. "No physical contact unless we're violent, and we're not being violent. You are." The standoff lasted 3 tense minutes before a senior guard arrived and defused the situation, ordering his colleagues to stand down. As the inmates dispersed, their small victory hung in the air, tangible, intoxicating. Word of the confrontation spread through Wallace like electricity through a conductor. By dinner, similar incidents had occurred in every block. Not organized resistance, but spontaneous assertion of dignity, too long denied. In his office, Warden Tate stared at the mounting incident reports with growing alarm. The phone on his desk had rung constantly since dawn. State officials demanding explanations, media requesting statements, the prison board calling for immediate containment of the situation. "Sir," his assistant interrupted, "the department undersecretary is holding on line 1, and the state police commander wants to know if you need tactical support." Tate waved her away, reaching instead for the bottle of whiskey in his bottom drawer. This wasn't supposed to happen. Holloway was meant to be the sacrifice that satisfied the public outrage while preserving the system. Instead, the entire foundation of Wallace Prison was threatening to collapse. His intercom buzzed again. "Sir, inmate Malik Carter is requesting an audience." Tate froze, whiskey glass halfway to his lips. "On what grounds?" "He says he has information about how to prevent a full-scale riot. Says you'll want to hear what he has to say." The warden considered his options. Deny the request and risk further deterioration. Grant it and potentially legitimize the very inmate who had orchestrated Holloway's downfall. "Bring him to my office," he decided finally. "Full restraints, 2 guards at all times." 30 minutes later, Malik sat across from Warden Tate, hands and ankles shackled. 2 armed guards flanked the door, watching his every movement. "Make this quick, Carter," Tate said, not bothering with pleasantries. "You claim to have information." "Not information," Malik corrected. "A proposal. I don't negotiate with inmates." "This isn't a negotiation. It's a life raft." Malik leaned forward slightly. "The recordings Ethan Calloway released mention you 11 times, Warden. Specifically, your knowledge of Holloway's methods and your tacit approval of his racial enforcement policies." Tate's expression remained neutral, but a muscle in his jaw twitched. "Hearsay from a disgruntled employee." "Perhaps, but there's more evidence waiting to be released. Evidence that directly implicates you in covering up the Jenkins death. Evidence the media doesn't have yet." The warden's face paled slightly. "What do you want?" "Institutional reform," Malik stated simply. "Not cosmetic changes to please the investigators, but structural changes to how Wallace operates." "You're in no position to make demands." "I'm not demanding. I'm offering you salvation." Malik's voice remained calm, reasonable. "Right now, inmates are angry but directionless. They need a channel for that energy that doesn't end in violence. Give them one, and you might survive this with your career intact." "What exactly are you suggesting?" "An inmate council, representatives from each block, meeting regularly with administration to address grievances and propose policy changes, transparent disciplinary procedures, an end to racially segregated housing and work assignments." Tate laughed bitterly. "You want me to hand control of my prison to the inmates?" "I want you to acknowledge they're human beings with rights, not animals to be controlled through fear and division," Malik countered. "The old system is collapsing, Warden. You can either help build something better in its place, or you can go down with it." The warden studied him for a long moment. "And if I agree to consider these reforms, what happens to the additional evidence?" "It stays buried, along with your complicity in Holloway's abuses." Their eyes locked in silent negotiation. Finally, Tate nodded once. I'll draft a proposal for the board. No promises beyond that. That's a start, Malik acknowledged. But understand this, if you're playing for time hoping to weather the storm and return to business as usual, it won't work. The inmates know their power now. They won't surrender it again. As Malik was escorted from the warden's office, he noted the increased security throughout the administrative wing. Nervous guards, reinforced checkpoints, administrative staff, watching inmates with new wariness. The power dynamics had shifted, visibly. The hunters now felt hunted. Outside in the corridors, he passed Holloway's former office. The door stood open, personal effects already removed. A symbolic vacancy that spoke volumes. The tyrant's throne empty but not yet claimed. Back in D Block, Malik found the atmosphere transformed. Inmates gathered in small, mixed-race groups, discussing the news reports, sharing stories of abuses previously suffered in silence. The racial boundaries that had defined Wallace for decades hadn't disappeared entirely, but they had blurred significantly. Patterson waited anxiously in their cell. "Where'd they take you? Everyone's been talking." The warden wanted a conversation, Malik explained, settling onto his bunk. "About what?" "The future of Wallace Prison." As Malik described his meeting with Tate, neither man noticed the shadow that paused briefly outside their cell. Ghost, listening intently before continuing down the corridor. That evening, as blocks prepared for lockdown, Ghost moved through, Wallace with unusual freedom, speaking briefly with key inmates in each section. His Wall Street skills, persuasion, negotiation, the identification of leverage points, proved as effective in prison politics as they had in finance. To White, inmates nervous about losing Holloway's protection, he whispered about new alliances that would preserve their status. To black inmates hungry for revenge, he suggested strategic patience rather than immediate satisfaction. To Latino leaders watching from the sidelines, he offered partnership in whatever new order emerged. Unlike Malik's vision of institutional reform, Ghost sold a different narrative, power redistribution, with those smart enough to align with him reaping the benefits. While this shadow campaign unfolded, Ethan Calloway sat in a downtown hotel room, watching news coverage of the Wallace scandal with mounting anxiety. His lawyer had insisted he remain unreachable until formal whistleblower protections could be arranged, but isolation was taking its toll. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You started something you can't control. Holloway has friends everywhere. Watch your back." Outside the hotel, a dark sedan had been parked across the street for 3 hours, its occupants invisible behind tinted windows. Meanwhile, in a suburban safe house provided by the state police, Dean Holloway paced like a caged animal. Officially, he was under protective custody for his own safety. In reality, he was being contained while investigators built their case against him. "This is ridiculous," he snapped at the state trooper assigned to guard him. "I maintained order in that prison for 15 years. Now I'm treated like a criminal because I didn't coddle dangerous inmates?" The trooper maintained professional detachment. "Just following orders, sir." "They're crucifying me to satisfy the media," Holloway continued, his composure cracking. "But I know things about Tate, about state officials who approved every policy they're now condemning. I kept detailed records too." "Perhaps you should discuss that with your lawyer, sir," the trooper suggested neutrally. Holloway's eyes narrowed. "You think I'm going down alone? There's a whole system behind what happened at Wallace, and if they want to sacrifice me, I'll make sure everyone burns with me." The night deepened, and Wallace Prison settled into an uneasy quiet. In cells throughout the facility, inmates who had lived under Holloway's brutal regime for years found sleep elusive, minds racing with possibilities that had seemed impossible just days before. Shortly after midnight, the first signs of coordinated resistance emerged. In C Block, inmates began a rhythmic tapping on cell bars. 3 quick taps. Pause 3 more. The pattern spread to D Block, then B Block, creating a percussive wave that rippled through Wallace's concrete corridors. Guards on night duty exchanged nervous glances, unsure how to respond to this non-violent but unsettling demonstration. One reached for his radio before his partner shook his head. Calling attention to it would only validate its significance. By morning, the atmosphere had shifted again. Inmates moved through their routines with new confidence, meeting guards' eyes directly, speaking in normal tones rather than the subdued murmurs Holloway had enforced. The balance of power continued its subtle but inexorable shift. Breakfast brought another surprise. As inmates filed into the mess hall, they found themselves no longer segregated by race. Instead, they self-organized by blocks, creating naturally integrated eating arrangements that rendered the old racial divisions obsolete. Guards watched helplessly, aware that enforcing the previous segregation would trigger precisely the confrontation they were ordered to avoid. Without Holloway's system to maintain, they defaulted to simply keeping order, regardless of who sat where. In the midst of this transformation, Wallace received unexpected visitors. State corrections officials arrived with a team of independent investigators, not the superficial inspection team from before, but seasoned professionals with experience in prison reform and civil rights violations. Full access to all facilities, all records, all personnel, their team leader informed Warden Tate, and private interviews with any inmates who wish to speak with us. The warden's attempt to project confidence failed to mask his growing panic. Of course, Wallace has nothing to hide. As I've stated publicly, any abuses were the actions of a single officer who has been removed from duty. We'll determine that for ourselves, the lead investigator replied coolly. As word of the investigator's presence spread, inmates began requesting interviews, dozens then hundreds raising their hands to share experiences previously left unspoken. Stories of beatings disguised as cell extractions, racially motivated, punishment, parole sabotage, medical care withheld as discipline. The investigators set up in the visiting area, creating a steady stream of inmates moving through the prison, a visibility that made it impossible for guards to retaliate against those who spoke out. In this charged atmosphere, Ghost made his first public move. During yard time, he called together a group of influential inmates from all blocks and races, former enemies now united by their common oppression under Holloway's regime. Wallace is changing, he told them, his voice carrying the polished persuasion of his Wall Street days. But change without direction leads to chaos. We need organization, structure, leadership. Malik's already working on that. 1C block. Inmate objected. The Inmate Council. Malik's vision is admirable, Ghost acknowledged smoothly. But naive. The administration will never willingly share power. We need to take what's ours, control of our daily lives, our safety, our dignity. His words resonated with inmates frustrated by years of abuse. The promise of seizing power rather than negotiating for crumbs appealed to those who distrusted any system-led reform. What exactly are you proposing? Asked a former lieutenant of Hanson's crew. An alternative power structure, Ghost explained. Not fighting the administration directly. That's a losing battle. Instead, we build our own system within these walls. Control contraband, information flow, block leadership. Create a unified front that the guards and administration must recognize and respect. And who leads this alternative structure? Someone called out. Ghost smiled modestly. Leadership should be distributed. Representatives from each block, each major group, a council of our own, but one with real power, not just the appearance of input that the warden offers. The gathering nodded, murmured approval. Ghost's proposal offered the satisfaction of control without the risk of direct confrontation. And what about Malik? Big D asked, his massive frame drawing attention as he stepped forward. His approach got us this far. Malik remains an important voice, Ghost assured them. But one man's vision is limited. What I'm proposing builds on his foundation but takes it further. As the group dispersed, Ghost's first seeds of alternative leadership had been planted. Not a direct challenge to Malik, but a parallel path that appealed to those seeking more tangible, immediate power. Malik, engaged in a lengthy interview with state investigators, remained unaware of Ghost's maneuvers until late afternoon, when Willis sought him out in the library. You should know what's happening, the young white inmate told him quietly. Ghost is organizing something. calling it a survival structure, but it sounds more like taking over Holloway's system with different faces. I expected as much, Malik replied, not looking up from his book. Ghost has always been more interested in power than justice. Aren't you worried? He's gaining support, guys from all blocks, all races. People are drawn to familiar patterns, even harmful ones. Malik explained. Holloway's system was cruel but predictable. Ghost offers the comfort of a known structure, just with different beneficiaries. So you're just going to let him take control? Willis asked, disbelief evident in his voice. No. Malik closed his book. I'm going to offer something better, something sustainable. As dinner approached, Wallace Prison balanced on a knife's edge. The investigators' presence prevented immediate retaliation against inmates who testified. The warden, desperate to save his career, had publicly committed to reforms while privately planning damage control. Guards, uncertain of the new power dynamics, vacillated between their old authoritarian habits and a more tentative approach. Into this volatile mix came breaking news. Ethan Calloway had emerged from hiding to give a televised interview, detailing his experiences at Wallace and explaining why he'd risked everything to expose the abuse. His pale, earnest face filled the rec room television, his voice steady despite obvious fear. I couldn't remain silent, he explained. What happened at Wallace wasn't just about one bad officer. It was a system designed to dehumanize people, based on race, to maintain control through fear and division. I'm speaking out because those men deserve to be treated as human beings, not animals to be controlled. The camera cut to images of Wallace Prison, then to photographs of Holloway and Warden Tate. The anchor's voice continued. Officer Calloway's allegations have prompted a federal civil rights investigation. Sources close to the case indicate multiple charges are being considered against suspended Officer Dean Holloway, and questions are being raised about administrative complicity. The rec room erupted in cheers, a spontaneous, cathartic release of emotion that spread through the blocks like wildfire. For men accustomed to being ignored, forgotten, their suffering dismissed as deserved punishment, this public acknowledgement represented something profound: visibility, recognition of their humanity. The guards, overwhelmed by the sudden outburst, radioed for backup. Within minutes, tactical teams assembled in full riot gear, preparing to restore order by force if necessary. Warden Tate, monitoring from his office, faced the most critical decision of his career: deploy the tactical team and risk violence that would confirm the worst allegations about Wallace, or allow the emotional release to run its course, gambling that it wouldn't escalate to actual riot. As alarms blared throughout the prison, Malik moved quickly through D Block, speaking calmly to excited inmates. This is the moment they're waiting for, an excuse to use force. Don't give it to them. Our strength is in restraint, not reaction. His words reached some, but others were too consumed by the intoxicating possibility of retribution. In C Block, 2 inmates surrounded, a guard known for his harsh treatment, backing him against a wall. In B Block, others began barricading their cell block entrance, using mattresses and furniture to create a barrier against the approaching tactical team. Ghost, seeing the situation deteriorating, switched tactics immediately. This isn't the time, he shouted to his newly formed coalition. We need organization before confrontation. Stand down. But the momentum had shifted beyond any one person's control. Years of suppressed rage found expression in 1,000 individual acts of defiance, some peaceful, others verging on violence. As the tactical team prepared to enter B Block, the warden's voice came over the loudspeaker. All inmates return to your cells immediately. This is not a request. Compliance will be rewarded, resistance will be met with appropriate force. In the administrative wing, state investigators watched the unfolding chaos with grave concern. Your prison is about to explode, Warden, the lead investigator observed. And your response in the next 5 minutes will determine whether you face negligence charges or criminal ones. Tate stared at the security monitors, watching his career implode in real time. What would you suggest? De-escalation, immediately. Pull back the tactical team. Address the immediate emotional reaction, not the symptoms. After a moment's hesitation, Tate grabbed the microphone again. All staff, stand down. I repeat, stand down. Tactical team, hold position, but do not engage. All inmates, I am requesting your cooperation. Return to your designated areas. I give you my word that no disciplinary action will be taken for today's emotional response to the news broadcast. The unexpected conciliatory tone cut through the chaos, creating momentary confusion. Into this pause stepped Malik, who had made his way to the center of D Block. "Listen to me," he called out, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had become his hallmark. "This is what they want. An excuse to prove we're uncontrollable, to prove Holloway was right. We've come too far to give them that satisfaction now." Around the prison, similar voices rose, Big D and C Block, Willis among the white inmates, even Ghost adding his persuasive skills to the cause of immediate de-escalation. Gradually, improbably, the tension began to subside. Inmates stepped back from direct confrontation, though they didn't immediately return to cells. Instead, they gathered in small groups, continuing to watch the news coverage that had sparked the outburst. The tactical team remained poised but didn't advance. Guards maintained distance but didn't retreat. For long minutes, Wallace Prison existed in a state of tenuous equilibrium, neither full compliance nor open rebellion. In this suspended moment, Malik recognized both opportunity and danger. Change was possible, perhaps inevitable now. But the form it would take, violence or progress, revenge or justice, hung in the balance. And forces beyond his control were already moving to tip that balance in their preferred direction. The fragile peace at Wallace Prison shattered at precisely 6:42 the following morning. In C Block, an inmate named Rodriguez was found unconscious in the shower, beaten to the edge of death. He had testified to investigators the previous day, naming guards who had participated in orchestrated fights under Holloway's supervision. Within an hour, retaliatory violence erupted across 3 blocks. Old grudges, long suppressed by Holloway's rigid racial divisions, now exploded in the vacuum his absence created. Malik woke to the sound of shouting, cell doors slamming, and the unmistakable dull thud of bodies hitting concrete. Before he could fully process what was happening, Patterson was at his bunk, face tight with fear. "It's happening," his cellmate whispered. C Block's in full revolt. Guards beat Matthews for refusing morning lineup. When others protested, they went in with batons. Now inmates are fighting back. Malik dressed quickly, mind racing. This was too soon, too disorganized. The state investigation had barely begun. The reforms he'd proposed to Warden Tate weren't even formalized. If violence took root now, it would justify the very crackdown they had been working to prevent. "What about D Block?" he asked, moving to their cell door. "Still locked down, but you can feel it coming," Patterson replied. "Guards are suited, up, waiting for orders. Everyone's watching C Block through the windows." The corridor outside their cell hummed with tension. Inmates pressed against the reinforced glass partitions separating the blocks, witnessing the chaos unfolding one section away. In C Block, figures scrambled across the open area, some fighting each other, others attempting to barricade entrances against the approaching tactical teams. "I need to talk to them," Malik said, scanning for any guard who might grant access. "This isn't the way." "Too late for talk," a voice observed from behind. Ghost stood in the corridor, watching the scene with clinical detachment. "The pressure's been building for years. Holloway's removal just pulled the pin from the grenade." "You knew this would happen," Malik realized, studying Ghost's composed expression. "I predicted it," Ghost corrected. "Chaos was inevitable. The question now is who harnesses it." Before Malik could respond, the block doors slid open. Guards in full riot gear poured in, forming a line across the entrance. "All inmates on the ground. Now," their commander ordered through a tactical megaphone. "Anyone standing in 10 seconds will be considered actively resisting." Some inmates complied immediately. Others backed toward their cells, hands raised in partial compliance. A few stood defiantly despite the overwhelming force arrayed against them. "Last warning," the commander's voice echoed through the block. "On the ground or we deploy chemical agents." Malik made a split-second decision. Instead of dropping to the floor, he stepped forward, hands clearly visible. "These men aren't resisting," he called out, voice steady. "They're frightened. The situation in C Block has everyone on edge. Give us a chance to de-escalate this." The tactical commander hesitated, clearly not expecting reasoned negotiation. In that moment of uncertainty, more inmates moved to stand beside Malik. First Patterson, then Willis, then a dozen others from various racial groups. Not threatening, but unified. "I'm authorized to use necessary force," the commander stated, but his tone had shifted from aggression to caution. "And we're asking you not to make that necessary," Malik replied. "Let me speak with whoever's coordinating the response. There's still a chance to resolve this without further violence." An unexpected voice joined the conversation. "I'll take responsibility for D Block." Big D emerged from the crowd, positioning his massive frame beside Malik. "These men will follow my lead. No resistance, no violence." The commander consulted briefly with his team before responding. "You two, Carter and Wilson, come with us to speak with the warden. Everyone else back in your cells until further notice." As they were escorted through the corridors, Malik and Big D witnessed the full extent of the chaos engulfing Wallace. B Block remained relatively calm but tense, with inmates locked down and tactical teams positioned at entrances. A block, housing minimum security and trustee inmates, was being evacuated to the gymnasium for their protection. But C Block had become a war zone. Through passing glimpses, they saw guards in full riot gear engaged in hand-to-hand combat with inmates. Tear gas clouded the air. Makeshift weapons, broken mop handles, sharpened plastic, even a guard's stolen baton, had transformed ordinary prisoners into desperate combatants. "This is what 15 years of Holloway's reign has created," Big D murmured as they passed a bloodied inmate being dragged to the infirmary. "All that hatred, nowhere to go but out." "Or up," Malik observed, nodding toward the administrative wing where Warden Tate awaited them. The warden's office had transformed into a crisis command center. Security monitors displayed feeds from throughout the prison. Administrative staff coordinated with external agencies, state police visible. On the perimeter, ambulances staged nearby. Tate himself looked haggard, his usual polished appearance giving way to the reality of a man watching his career implode. "Wilson, Carter." He acknowledged them without warmth. "I'm told you're offering to help contain this situation." "We're offering to prevent unnecessary bloodshed," Malik corrected. "What's happening in C Block is the result of years of systemic abuse, not just today's events." "Spare me the sociology lesson," Tate snapped. "I have 3 guards hospitalized and at least 12 inmates seriously injured. State officials are threatening to bring in the National Guard if we can't regain control within the hour." "Then, give us 30 minutes, Big D proposed. "Let us speak to C Block, inmate to inmate, no guards present." "Absolutely not." "What's your alternative?" Malik challenged. "More tear gas? Rubber bullets? How many bodies before the media outside your gates gets the massacre story they're waiting for?" The warden's face contorted with barely controlled rage. "You orchestrated this, Carter. You and that whistleblower guard dismantled the system that kept Wallace functioning for 15 years. "Holloway's system was a pressure cooker," Malik replied calmly. "This was inevitable. The only question was when, not if." A security coordinator interrupted, phone in hand. "Sir, the governor's office is on the line. They're asking for a status update." Tate's shoulders sagged momentarily before he straightened, decision made. 30 minutes. You'll wear body armor and be monitored remotely. If anything suggests you're encouraging further resistance rather than calming it, the tactical team comes in with full authorization to use whatever force necessary." "Understood," Malik agreed. As they were fitted with protective vests, Big D leaned close to Malik. "You know we're being set up, right? If this fails, we take the blame. If it succeeds, Tate claims credit for innovative conflict resolution." "I know," Malik confirmed. But right now, stopping the bloodshed matters more than who gets credit. The approach to C Block resembled preparation for urban warfare. Tactical officers created a corridor through which Malik and Big D would enter, then withdraw to a perimeter position, maintaining visual contact but giving the appearance of distance. Before they entered, the tactical commander offered a final warning. We'll be watching every move. Any sign you're making things worse, we come in hard. No hesitation, no negotiation. We understand, Malik assured him, though they both recognized the threat beneath the warning. C Block, once they entered, barely resembled the prison they knew. Overturned tables formed makeshift barricades. Smears of blood stained the concrete floors. Tear gas residue hung in the air, burning their eyes and throats. Inmates had segregated themselves, not by race as in Holloway's era, but by allegiance to various block leaders who had emerged in the chaos. "Who speaks for C Block now?" Big D called out, his voice carrying authority born from years of enforcing Holloway's will in this very space. From behind an overturned table emerged James Corbin, a lifer with nothing to lose. His face was streaked with blood and sweat, eyes wild with the intoxication of momentary freedom from constraint. "What's this?" he challenged, gesturing between Malik and Big D. "Warden's new pets come to tell us to be good boys?" "We're here to stop the killing," Malik replied, "on both sides." "Too late for that," another inmate called out. "They came in swinging. Rodriguez might not make it to tomorrow." Matthews lost an eye to their batons. "And how many more will die if this continues?" Malik asked, directing his words to the entire block. "You know what comes next. The state calls in reinforcements. They retake the prison inch by inch. Anyone who resisted gets transferred to supermax facilities across the country, families left behind, no chance at parole." "We already got nothing to lose," someone shouted. "You have your dignity," Malik countered, "and right now you're proving everything they've said about you. Violent, uncontrollable, animals who need to be caged." A tense silence followed, broken only by the distant sound of alarms. "What's your play then, Carter?" Corbin asked. "Surrender and trust the system that's been grinding us down for years?" "No. Hold your ground, but without violence. The state investigators are still here. The media is at the gates. For the first time, people are watching what happens inside Wallace." Big D stepped forward. "I enforced Holloway's rules for 7 years. Hurt my own people to protect myself. That shame won't wash off easy." His voice deepened with emotion, rarely displayed. "But this isn't the answer either. You tear this place apart, they rebuild it stronger, more oppressive." "The warden's given us 30 minutes, Malik continued. "After that, the tactical team comes in with everything they have. But if we can establish a ceasefire, get the injured medical attention, demonstrate that inmates can govern themselves even in crisis, that changes the narrative." Corbin laughed bitterly. "Always about the narrative with you, isn't it? The long game. Meanwhile, real men are bleeding out on this floor." "Because I understand what you're only beginning to see," Malik replied. "This isn't about today's battle. It's about who controls tomorrow." The standoff stretched for several tense seconds before Corbin made his decision. "Get medical in here for the wounded. No guards, just medical staff. We'll maintain position, but cease active resistance. That's the best offer you'll get." "I'll make it happen," Malik promised. As they prepared to deliver this conditional acceptance to the waiting tactical team, an explosion rocked the administrative wing. Smoke billowed from shattered windows as alarms shifted from the measured alert of a contained incident to the frantic wail signaling imminent danger. "What the hell was that?" Big D demanded, instinctively ducking for cover. Through their earpieces, they heard the tactical commander shouting orders. "All units to admin. Bomb detonated in the east corridor. Multiple casualties. Possible escaped. Inmates." The chaos they'd been sent to contain in C Block had been a distraction, or a coordinated component of something larger. "Go," Corbin urged, surprisingly. "If someone's using our resistance as cover for something else, I want to know who." Escorted by tactical officers now divided between multiple emergencies, Malik and Big D rushed toward the administrative wing. The scene that greeted them defied belief. The reinforced corridor connecting the warden's office to the security center had been breached by what appeared to be an improvised explosive device. Guards and administrative staff lay injured, being tended by overwhelmed medical personnel. "Where's the warden?" Malik asked a dazed security coordinator. "Secure room," the man managed, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead. "Standard protocol for level 1 emergencies." "And Holloway?" The question came from Big D, his intuition connecting dots faster than conscious thought. The coordinator's expression shifted to confusion. "He was brought in for questioning about an hour ago. State investigators wanted him on site to respond to specific allegations." Malik and Big D exchanged alarmed glances. Where were they questioning him? Conference Room B, East Corridor. The same corridor now in ruins. As they processed this information, Ghost appeared at the far end of the hallway, calmly navigating the debris and injured personnel as if taking a casual stroll. His prison blues had been replaced by a guard's uniform, not a disguise but a statement of control. He nodded once to Malik before disappearing down an adjacent hallway. "He's behind this," Big D realized. "All of it. The riot in C Block, the explosion, it's a power grab." "Not just a grab," Malik corrected, the full strategy becoming clear. "A complete restructuring, create chaos, eliminate key players, establish himself as the necessary alternative to anarchy." They pushed forward, following Ghost's path despite the tactical team's orders to evacuate. The trail led to a rarely used service corridor connecting the administrative wing to the staff parking area, a potential escape route known to few inmates. At the corridor's end stood Ghost, calmly holding a set of keys beside a staff exit. Terror. And at his feet, battered but conscious, lay Dean Holloway. Perfect timing. Ghost greeted them as casual as if they'd met for a scheduled appointment. "I was wondering who would figure it out first." "What are you doing?" Malik demanded, though he already suspected the answer. "Accelerating the inevitable," Ghost replied. "Wallace needs a new power structure. Not Holloway's brutality, not your idealistic reforms, but something pragmatic. Functional. With you at the top," Big D observed. Ghost shrugged. "Someone has to be. Might as well be the person who understands both worlds, yours and theirs." He nudged Holloway with his foot. "The former King of Wallace delivered as a gift to whichever faction wants him most. Imagine the currency that creates in our new economy of influence." Holloway, despite his injuries, managed to raise his head. His eyes, once filled with arrogant authority, now showed naked fear. "This isn't protocol," he gasped. "Guards. We'll shoot escaped prisoners on sight." "I'm not escaping," Ghost corrected. "I'm establishing a negotiating position. By now, my people have secured control of 3 blocks. The warden's locked in his safe room, tactical teams divided between multiple crises, state officials desperate to avoid a massacre on camera." His smile was coldly professional. "They'll deal with me because I'll be the only one offering a path to resolution without nationally televised bloodshed." The calculated brilliance of Ghost's strategy was undeniable. While Malik had worked to dismantle Holloway's system through ethical means, Ghost had simply identified the power vacuum and moved to fill it, using the chaos as both cover and justification. "And what happens to the inmates who get caught in your game?" Malik challenged. "The ones dying in C Block while you're making your power play?" "Collateral damage in any transition of power," Ghost dismissed. "Unfortunate but unavoidable." "Like hell it is," Big D growled, his massive frame tensing for confrontation. Ghost produced a makeshift weapon, a sharpened length of metal that had likely been part of the explosive device. "I respect you both truly, but you're choosing the wrong side of history here." The standoff balanced on a knife's edge. Behind them, the sounds of tactical teams regrouping echoed through the corridors. Before them stood Ghost, armed and calculating, with Holloway at his mercy. And beyond the exit door lay uncertainty, media cameras, state officials, the watching world. "There's another option," Malik said finally. "One that doesn't end with more blood." "Always the negotiator," Ghost replied, though his weapon remained steady. "I'm listening," We take Holloway to the state investigators, alive, accountable. Give them the evidence Big D compiled, the testimony Ethan recorded. Let justice happen through the system, not despite it. Justice? Ghost laughed incredulously. From the same system that created Wallace in the first place? That rewarded Holloway for 15 years of abuse? Not the old system, Malik clarified. The one we're forcing them to create through visibility. Media attention, public outrage. The one where prisons can't operate as kingdoms hidden from view. Holloway, hearing his fate discussed so clinically, attempted to leverage the division. Wilson, he addressed Big D directly, you've been my man for years. Don't let them turn you against me now. I protected you, gave you privileges. You used me, Big D corrected, disgust evident in his voice. Made me hurt my own people too. Save myself. That debt comes due today. The negotiation was interrupted by the arrival of state police tactical units, weapons trained on all 3 inmates and Holloway. On the ground, all of you, the commander ordered through a tactical megaphone. Ghost's expression hardened. See? This is their idea of justice. No distinction between the guilty and the survivors. To everyone's surprise, Ethan Calloway stepped forward from behind the police line. Despite having no authority in this situation, his presence as the whistleblower, whose testimony had initiated the investigation, carried moral weight. Wait, he called to the tactical commander. These men aren't escapees. They prevented Holloway's escape during the chaos. The lie was delivered with such conviction that it momentarily confused even the state police. In that moment of hesitation, Malik made his move, not toward Ghost or Holloway, but toward transparency. The media needs to see this, he announced clearly. All of it. Holloway in custody. The state taking control from corrupt prison administration. Inmates helping restore order rather than creating chaos. The tactical commander, facing an unprecedented situation with cameras potentially recording outside, made a split-second decision. Secure Holloway. Escort these 3 inmates to the processing area for statement collection. He pointed to Malik, Big D, and Ghost. No restraints unless they resist. Ghost, seeing his leverage evaporating, made a final calculation. With the fluidity of someone accustomed to adapting strategies mid-execution, he lowered his weapon. I'll cooperate fully, he announced, loud, enough for nearby officers to hear. These men helped prevent Holloway's escape attempt. I can provide detailed testimony about corrupt practices throughout Wallace administration. The abrupt change from would-be power broker to cooperative witness happened so seamlessly that only Malik recognized it for what it was. Ghost's contingency plan already in motion. Unable to seize control directly, he would position himself as a crucial informant, building influence through information rather than force. As Holloway was secured and escorted away, his final glance toward Malik carried 15 years of hatred distilled into a single look. The king of Wallace had fallen, his kingdom crumbling around him. Outside the administrative wing, emergency vehicles crowded the prison approach. News helicopters circled overhead, capturing footage that would lead broadcasts nationwide. State officials huddled with federal representatives weighing options for managing a crisis that had escalated beyond containment. Malik, Big D, and Ghost were separated for questioning, each led to different areas of the processing center. Before they parted, Ghost leaned close to Malik, his voice barely audible. This isn't over, he promised. It's merely changing form. Remember what I told you when you arrived. I believe in power. Who has it, who doesn't, and how to get it. And I believe in justice, Malik replied, which means you and I were always going to end up on opposite sides. Ghost's smile was genuine, almost respectful, perhaps. But remember, when one system falls, another rises to take its place. The question is whether the new king will be any better than the old one. As they were led away, Malik caught sight of the gymnasium where unaffiliated inmates had been evacuated for safety. Among them stood Patterson, Willis, and others who had found themselves caught between opposing forces. Not leaders, not fighters, just men trying to survive a system designed to break them. For them, the fall of Holloway and the chaos that followed wasn't revolution or opportunity. It was simply another day of uncertainty in lives defined by the arbitrary exercise of power. And in that moment, despite the apparent victory over Holloway's brutal regime, Malik confronted the most difficult question of all. Had his carefully orchestrated dismantling of Wallace's corrupt system truly created something better for those men, or had it simply replaced one form of oppression with another yet to be defined? The answer would come in the days ahead, as Wallace Prison's future took shape amid the ruins of its past. A future where Holloway faced justice, Ghost maneuvered for influence, and the fundamental question remained: when one tyrant falls, who takes his place? 3 days after what the media had dubbed the Wallace Prison Uprising, a tentative calm had settled over the facility. State correctional officials maintained operational control, with local guards supervised by external officers. The most seriously injured inmates had been transferred to the state penitentiary hospital. Those identified as instigators of violence were held in a separate wing pending transfer to other facilities. In the administrative building's conference room, now serving as a command center, Malik sat across from 2 federal investigators. His status remained ambiguous, neither free man nor accused criminal, but a pivotal witness whose testimony would shape the future of Wallace and potentially prison reform across the state. "Let's continue where we left off yesterday," the lead investigator prompted, recorder running. "You stated that Ghost, Andre Williams, orchestrated the explosion as a distraction to access Holloway." "Yes," Malik confirmed. He saw an opportunity in the chaos to position himself as Wallace's new power broker. "Yet you chose to prevent Holloway's abduction rather than allow inmate justice to take its course. Why?" The question carried layers of meaning, testing Malik's commitment to legal process over retribution, evaluating his potential as either ally or threat to the new order emerging at Wallace. "Because true justice comes from systemic change, not exchanging one tyrant for another," Malik replied. "Holloway deserves to face legal consequences publicly, with all his actions exposed to the system that enabled him." The investigators exchanged glances, making notes before continuing. "And Ghost? How would you characterize his current intentions?" "Adaptation," Malik said simply. When direct control failed, he immediately shifted to information broker, offering testimony. Names, dates. He's trading knowledge for influence. "Successfully, it seems," the second investigator noted dryly. "He's provided details on contraband networks, guard corruption, and financial arrangements that extended well beyond Wallace." The implication was clear. Ghost had already made himself valuable to authorities, ensuring his survival regardless of how Wallace was reorganized. "What about Warden Tate?" Malik asked, turning the questioning back on the investigators. "Has he been removed from authority?" "Officially, he's on administrative leave pending investigation. Unofficially," the lead investigator hesitated, "he's cooperating extensively, providing documentation that traces responsibility to Holloway while minimizing his own involvement." "Cutting deals to save himself," Malik translated. "The situation is complex," the investigator replied diplomatically. "Reforming a system requires working with those who understand its operation." Malik understood the subtext. The same pragmatic compromise that had defined Wallace under Holloway, sacrificing justice for functionality, ethics for control, was simply taking new form under state management. After the interview concluded, Malik was escorted back to D Block, now operating under modified protocols. Cell doors remained open during daylight hours, racial segregation in common areas had been officially abandoned, and state-appointed counselors conducted daily group sessions on conflict resolution. Cosmetic changes, surface reforms that left the underlying structure intact. Patterson waited anxiously in their cell, eager for news. "What's happening out there?" "Rumors are flying. Some say Holloway's going to testify against everyone. Others say he's already made a deal for witness protection." "No one knows yet," Malik replied, sitting heavily on his bunk. "But the state's priority is containing the scandal, not transforming the system." "And Ghost?" "Playing all sides. providing enough information to make himself indispensable without fully committing to any faction. Patterson lowered his voice. He's been sending messages through his people, forming a council of block representatives, one from each major group. Says when the state leaves we'll need internal governance. He's creating his own power structure, Malik observed. More sophisticated than Holloway's, but serving the same purpose, control. Before they could discuss further, a guard appeared, at their cell. Carter, you have a visitor. In the visiting area, now equipped with recording devices and monitored by state officers rather than Wallace guards, Ethan Calloway waited. The young whistleblower looked simultaneously relieved and haunted, the weight of his choices evident in the shadows beneath his eyes. They're letting me leave the state, he said without preamble as Malik sat across from him. New identity relocation assistance, part of the whistleblower protection agreement. Smart decision, Malik acknowledged. You've made powerful enemies. Including your friend Ghost, Ethan noted. He named me specifically in his testimony, claimed I was selective in my recordings, omitted evidence that would have implicated others in administration. He's isolating potential threats. Standard, Wall Street tactic. Discredit anyone who might challenge your narrative. Ethan leaned forward, lowering his voice despite the monitoring. I didn't come just to say goodbye. I came to warn you. They're rebuilding Wallace, but not the way you hoped. The state's bringing in a new warden, former military, specialist, in restoring order to compromised facilities. They're reviewing all parole cases, including yours. Trying to remove potential leadership before the new system solidifies, Malik concluded. Exactly. And Tate's cutting deals, sharing every documented conversation with you, painting you as the mastermind behind the uprising while positioning himself as the voice of reason who tried to implement reforms. The irony wasn't lost on Malik. His carefully orchestrated campaign to expose Wallace's corruption had succeeded, yet the system was already adapting, absorbing the shock, and preparing to reconstitute itself in slightly altered form. What about Holloway? He asked, facing multiple charges, civil rights violations, abuse of power, evidence tampering. But he's negotiating too, offering to testify against higher-level officials who approved his methods over the years. Ethan's expression darkened. The system protects itself even when sacrificing individual components. And Big D? Being transferred to minimum security with a recommendation for parole review. His cooperation against Holloway bought him consideration. Malik nodded, unsurprised. The pieces were rearranging themselves, but the board remained the same. What will you do now? Ethan asked. Finish what I started, Malik replied. The exposure of Wallace's corruption was just the first step. The real challenge is ensuring what replaces it isn't merely a more sophisticated version of the same system. How? You're still an inmate. Your communication is monitored. Your movements restricted. Those aren't the only forms of power. Malik offered a small smile. You taught me that when you chose to record rather than remain silent. As they said their goodbyes, Ethan hesitated, before adding, there's something else you should know. I made copies of everything. All the recordings, documentation, witness statements, placed them with multiple sources to be released if anything happens to me, or if the reforms at Wallace prove superficial. Insurance, Malik observed. Truth, Ethan corrected. The one thing systems like Wallace can't survive. Later that afternoon, Malik received an unexpected summons to the chapel. Father Martinez, the prison chaplain who had maintained a neutral presence throughout Wallace's upheaval, greeted him with customary gentleness. You've accomplished something significant, the elderly man observed once they were seated in the quiet sanctuary. For the first time in 15 years, inmates gather in the yard without racial divisions enforced by guards. Cosmetic changes, Malik replied. The underlying power structure remains. Perhaps, but symbols matter, Mr. Carter. They shape expectations, which in turn shape reality. Before Malik could respond, the chapel door opened. Ghost entered, nodding respectfully to Father Martinez before taking a seat beside Malik. The chaplain has graciously agreed to allow us privacy, Ghost explained. Religious counseling is still privileged, even under state monitoring. Father Martinez confirmed this with a nod before retreating to his office, leaving the two men alone in the chapel's main area. I expected we'd have this conversation eventually, Malik acknowledged. We're not so different, you and I, Ghost began, his voice carrying the smooth persuasiveness that had served him well on Wall Street. We both recognize that Wallace's system was fundamentally broken. We both work to expose its corruption. We both understand that power properly applied can create order from chaos. The difference is in our definition of order, Malik replied, and who benefits from it. Ghost conceded the point with a slight nod. I'm offering you partnership, Malik, not subordination. Your moral authority combined with my practical influence could reshape Wallace into something genuinely progressive. The state will withdraw eventually, budget constraints, media attention shifting elsewhere. When that happens, whatever structure we've built internally will determine how this place functions. And you're proposing a council, representatives, from each block, each major group. Democratic in structure, but with guidance from those who understand power's realities. Ghost's eyes gleamed with the vision he was constructing. No more Holloway-style brutality, no racial enforcement, a system of mutual benefit, stability for the administration, dignity for inmates. The proposal was seductive in its rationality, a genuine improvement over Holloway's reign, yet preserving the hierarchical structure that Ghost understood so well. And your role in this new democracy? Malik asked. Advisor, facilitator. Ghost smiled slightly. I have certain skills in negotiation and resource allocation that would prove valuable. You want to be Wallace's Shadow King? I want to be on the winning side of inevitable change, Ghost corrected, and I'm offering you the same opportunity. Malik considered the proposal carefully. Ghost's system would indeed improve conditions for many inmates. It would reduce violence, create channels for addressing grievances, establish predictability in a chaotic environment. For men serving long sentences, these weren't insignificant considerations. Yet it would leave untouched the fundamental injustice of Wallace's existence, the systemic racism in sentencing that filled its cells, the economic incentives that sustained it, the societal abandonment that normalized it. I appreciate the offer, Malik said finally, but we're fighting different battles. You want to reform Wallace from within. I want to expose the reality that makes places like Wallace necessary in the first place. Ghost's expression hardened slightly. Noble, but abstract. Meanwhile, real men need functional systems to survive each day. They deserve more than survival. Perhaps, but don't let perfection become the enemy of improvement. Ghost rose to leave. My offer remains open, but understand, with or without you, a new order will emerge at Wallace. The only question is whether you'll help shape it or stand aside while others do. After Ghost departed, Malik remained in the chapel, contemplating the choice before him. Pragmatic partnership with a system he fundamentally opposed, or principled resistance that might leave inmates vulnerable during the transition. The question followed him through the next week as Wallace's reconfiguration accelerated. State authorities announced a comprehensive reorganization, a new warden appointed, staff reassignments completed, updated protocols implemented. They highlighted key reforms, integrated housing assignments, anti-racism training for guards, expanded educational opportunities, improved medical care, surface changes that left the deeper structure intact, the prison industrial complex adapting rather than transforming. In the yard, Malik observed Ghost's influence taking visible form. The former Wall Street broker moved easily between racial groups, mediating disputes, establishing connections, positioning his chosen representatives in each block, not through force but through strategic value creation. Protection here, privileges there, information is currency. Big D, his transfer to minimum security pending, approached Malik during yard time. Ghost's building something, he observed. Not like Holloway's kingdom, but not what you wanted either. I know, Malik acknowledged, you could stop him. Enough inmates would still follow your lead instead of his. And then what? Another power struggle? More violence? The state using it as justification for harsher restrictions? Malik shook his head. That's the cycle we need to break, not perpetuate. Big D studied him thoughtfully. So what's your play? Something different, Malik replied. Something outside their expectations. The opportunity came 3 days later when national media arrived to document Wallace's successful reform initiative. State officials had orchestrated a carefully managed tour, select inmates interviewed, newly integrated activities highlighted, the narrative of transformation firmly controlled. Malik, identified as a positive leadership influence during the transition, was among those approved for media interaction. Seated across from a prominent network correspondent, cameras recording, he faced the predictable opening question. Mr. Carter, as someone who witnessed the abuses under Officer Holloway's regime, how would you characterize the changes implemented at Wallace Prison? The stage was set for the expected response. Grateful acknowledgement of improvements, validation of the state's reform narrative, the comfortable story of a broken system now healing. Instead, Malik chose truth. What you're seeing today is adaptation, not transformation, he began, ignoring the state representative who stiffened at the unexpected deviation. Wallace Prison existed as a tool of racial control long before Officer Holloway implemented his explicit policies. The disproportionate incarceration of Black and Latino men, the economic incentives that make prisons profitable, the systematic denial of rehabilitation in favor of punishment, these remain unchanged. The correspondent, surprised by this direct challenge to the official narrative, followed instinctively. Are you suggesting the reforms are ineffective? I'm suggesting they're insufficient, Malik clarified. Necessary but not sufficient. Wallace isn't an aberration in the system, it's the system functioning as designed. The question isn't whether Wallace can be reformed, but whether the society that created and sustained it is willing to examine its own contradictions. The state representative attempted to intervene, but the journalist, sensing a powerful story beyond the planned public relations exercise, pressed on. What contradictions specifically? A society that incarcerates more of its citizens than any other developed nation while claiming to be the land of freedom. A judicial system that sentences Black men to significantly longer terms than white men for identical crimes. A political structure that profits from punishment rather than investing in prevention. Malik met the camera's eye directly. Wallace, prison isn't a broken component in a functioning system. It's a functioning component in a broken system. The interview was abruptly terminated, but the damage, or triumph, depending on perspective, was done. Unfiltered truth had entered the carefully managed narrative. Impossible to extract once broadcast nationally. The consequences were swift. Malik was immediately isolated from other inmates, his visitation privileges suspended, his status reviewed, for potential transfer. Yet the impact of his statement rippled outward beyond Wallace's walls. Civil rights organizations seized on his testimony as vindication of their critiques. Legal advocacy groups cited his comments in ongoing litigation, challenging sentencing disparities. Academic institutions requested permission to include his perspective in criminal justice curricula. Inside Wallace, the immediate effects were mixed. Some inmates viewed Malik's stance as admirable but ultimately harmful to their daily conditions, antagonizing authorities who controlled their fate. Others recognized it as the necessary complement to Ghost's internal reorganization, external pressure forcing transparency, while internal structures created stability. Ghost himself visited Malik in isolation, having negotiated access through his growing network of influence. Impressive performance, he acknowledged. Bold if strategically questionable. We each play our role, Malik replied. Yours is building something functional within the existing framework. Mine is challenging the framework itself. They'll transfer you, Ghost warned. Remove you from Wallace before you can build further support. I know. Understanding dawned in Ghost's eyes. That was your plan. Force their hand. Take your message beyond Wallace while ensuring you're not positioned as a direct challenge to whatever order emerges here. Malik neither confirmed nor denied the assessment. Clever, Ghost conceded. You get to maintain moral authority without responsibility for implementation. I get to establish functional systems without direct opposition. The inmates get stability internally while external pressure continues for meaningful reform. A transitional arrangement, Malik characterized it. Not an endpoint. Ghost smiled slightly. We are both strategists, just with different time frames and metrics for success. He rose to leave. For what it's worth, I hope your approach works. My methods improve conditions within the system. Yours might someday eliminate the need for my methods altogether. 2 weeks later, Malik's transfer order came through. Not to another maximum security facility as expected, but to a progressive minimum security institution known for its rehabilitation programs and educational opportunities, a calculated compromise by authorities. Remove him from Wallace while avoiding any appearance of punitive reaction to his public testimony. As he prepared to leave, collecting his few possessions under supervision, Malik received unexpected visitors. Warden Tate, now working as a special advisor during the transition to new leadership, accompanied by the incoming warden, Colonel Richard Hayes. I underestimated you from the beginning, Tate admitted without preamble. Saw the activist, missed the strategist. Common mistake, Malik replied, continuing to pack methodically. Your transfer has been arranged with certain accommodations, the former warden continued. Access to legal resources, educational programs, media correspondence privileges. In exchange for moderation in your public statements regarding Wallace's ongoing reforms. The offer was clear. Comfort and opportunity in exchange for muted criticism. Tempting, Malik acknowledged, but unnecessary. My issue was never with Wallace specifically, but with what it represents. I'll speak truth about the system regardless of personal consequences. Colonel Hayes, the incoming warden, studied Malik with professional assessment. You've achieved something significant here, Mr. Carter. The integration protocols we're implementing at Wallace are being considered for statewide adoption. Surface reforms, Malik responded. Necessary but insufficient. Perhaps, Hayes conceded. But concrete improvements in daily conditions for thousands of inmates, a foundation for further change. I hope you're right. Your allies here will be treated fairly, Hayes added, recognizing one of Malik's unspoken concerns. No retribution for their association with you. It was as much assurance as could reasonably be expected, a professional acknowledgement of Malik's legitimate influence without conceding control of the narrative. As they departed, Tate lingered momentarily. Holloway's pleading guilty to reduced charges, he informed Malik. Cooperating fully against former associates in exchange for placement in segregated custody out of state. No public trial then, Malik noted. No full exposure of the system that enabled him. Politics and pragmatism, Tate shrugged. The world as it is, not as we wish it to be. For now, Malik replied. His final hours at Wallace brought a procession of quiet goodbyes. Patterson, who would continue documenting events through his library network. Willis, now serving as a mediator between formerly antagonistic racial groups. Even Big D, delaying his own transfer to minimum security to ensure Malik's safe departure. Ghost's system is taking shape, Big D reported. Block representatives, formal grievance procedures, negotiated agreements with the new administration, not perfect but better than before. And the racial divisions? Fading gradually. Not gone, but no longer enforced. Men make their own choices now. It was something. Not the transformation Malik had envisioned, but evolution rather than stagnation. As the transport van prepared to take him from Wallace for the final time, Malik caught sight of Ghost observing from the yard perimeter. No words were exchanged, none needed. They had each chosen their path in the aftermath of Holloway's fall. Ghost to reform from within, Malik to challenge from without. Parallel strategies that might, in time, converge toward justice. Wallace Prison receded in the rearview mirror, its imposing walls unchanged yet containing a subtly altered reality. Holloway's kingdom had fallen, its rigid racial hierarchy crumbling, its most brutal enforcer removed from power. What replaced it remained imperfect, Ghost's pragmatic influence balanced against state oversight and the watchful eyes of newly empowered inmates. Not transformation, but transition. Not victory, but opportunity. Not an ending, but a beginning. In the minimum security facility that would become his new temporary home, Malik would find unexpected allies, progressive administrators, reform-minded legal advocates, journalists seeking deeper understanding of the system's flaws. His story would become part of a larger narrative challenging the foundations of mass incarceration, racial disparity in sentencing, the prison industrial complex itself. The kingdom of Wallace Prison had fallen, but the empire that created it remained. That would be the next battlefield. Not concrete walls and iron bars, but policies and perspectives, budgets and ballots, the collective conscience of a society that had normalized the systematic warehousing of human beings. For the men still within Wallace's walls, daily reality had improved. The immediate cruelty had diminished. Dignity had been partially restored. Voice had been granted where silence was once enforced. Ghost's pragmatic leadership combined with external scrutiny created space for genuine, if limited, self-determination. And perhaps that was the most realistic victory possible. Not perfect justice, but incremental improvement. Not revolutionary transformation, but evolutionary change. Not the world as it should be, but the world as it could be, moving however slowly toward what it might become. The tyrant had fallen. The system that created him wobbled but endured. The work continued beyond the kingdom's walls. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.